No, we have a Defending Democracy task force that is dedicated to this very subject and led by the Security Minister, and we as a team are actively participating. We're also working with social media companies and our international counterparts. It's something that I personally put on the agenda at the summit. It's something that I personally discussed at forums like the G7. The Deputy Prime Minister is also leading the way with his AI compact. There is no easy answer to this, but we are working in a conciliatory and speedily manner to ensure that we address all opportunities and answers.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The data bill before Parliament builds on the high standards we already have for personal data protection. It strengthens and modernises the regulator so that it can enforce standards much more robustly to protect people, and we're looking at what we can do to strengthen our cyber resilience and data infrastructure all the time as new technology develops.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for that answer. Clearly, it's vital that the enormous amounts of personal data that are collected by government departments and private companies must be safeguarded. I've had a number of complaints to me about people's personal data being abused by companies, and indeed from the public sector it being sold to companies who then use it. Just this weekend, our GLA candidate had his phone hacked and his social media destroyed. That's equally important as a demonstration of what can happen to democracy when data is abused. So can my honourable friend take further action to safeguard people's personal data?
Well, I thank him for highlighting that case, and I regret what's happened to the GLA candidate, and it does highlight some of the risks that we all carry in relation to technology. That's why we have a very high data protection standards, but also there's a range of ways in which we need to tackle this problem. We have the National Cyber Strategy, which is working to make sure that we can deal with the cyber threats that we face. We're taking measures to protect our data infrastructure, to trying to do things to stop fraud in the National Stop Think Fraud Strategy, and new laws on security of devices, like connected devices. So there's a whole range of things we need to do, but we need to keep making sure that we're vigilant about the risks.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, when my 91-year-old mother died, for purely sentimental reasons, I took on her landline. For months and months and months after that, I kept on getting scam calls offering all sorts of dodgy products. Does the Minister agree with me that the elderly must have their ID, their personal data protected almost more than anyone?
Well, I'm sorry to hear about the experience of my honourable friend's mother, and I'm afraid it's one that's shared by constituents across the country. That's why we have taken new measures in the data bill to try and deal with these problems of scam calls and try and make sure we can see data and see where those numbers are and take action so we can block them on bulk. But I appreciate what he's saying, and it's something that we must tackle.
Shadow Minister Chris Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are told this year is general election year. Already in other countries, we have seen those who want to manipulate democracy use AI to scrape together personal details, like someone's face and voice, allowing them to falsify candidates' views. And I think it was quite pertinent the honourable member for Harrow East raised that about a GLA candidate. As we quickly approach the second half of the year, when we are told the Prime Minister will finally call the election, will the government commit to ensure personal details are protected for candidates, voters, and above all democracy as a matter of urgency?
Well, we absolutely share those concerns. That's why we have a Defending Democracy task force that's working across every government department to look at the threats to our democracy. It's a very substantial threat that we face, and one that we all have to be mindful of in the way in which we conduct ourselves as candidates. AI and fakes and the protection of data is one element of that, but I want to assure the House that we have a whole range of measures that we're taking to make sure that the protection of this coming general election is robust.
SNP spokesperson Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Individuals' personal data is not safe in Tory hands. A recent article in The Guardian reported that senior Tory party officials plan to make millions from selling off their own members' data through the True Blue app. Now, if the Tory party is happy to sell off personal data of their own members, how can the public possibly have confidence that their data is safe under this government?
The allegations that the lady has put forward, I mean, they were written in The Guardian. They're not any that I have seen myself. I'm presiding over the data bill. I've seen no evidence to suggest that we are trying to bring forward laws that would do such things.
Thank you, Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ofcom is the independent regulator of the Online Safety Act. The government is working with them to implement the Act as quickly as possible, including the relevant secondary legislation. Ofcom is taking a phased approach to bringing the duties into effect and is consulting on guidance and codes of practice. Offences around serious online abuse came into effect the 31st of January this year.
Vicky Ford.
The Online Safety Act did introduce many measures to keep children safe online, but given the increased concerns about children's online safety, does she agree it is now time to go even further and introduce a child-safe phone, thus ensuring that at a minimum all phones intended for children are properly fitted with parental controls to stop children from accessing harmful content?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, the government did produce world-leading legislation when it comes to online safety, which puts the onus on social media companies and not the parents. I know that my honourable friend has spoken about information before, which is particularly important in making it as easy as possible for parents. She does raise an important point regarding device-level controls, and I can assure her that I'm listening not just to members of this House, but also to parents too.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Yesterday, the government finally backed Labour's calls and announced they would be making the creation of deepfake porn a criminal offence. However, it is disappointing that the government continue to adopt an intent-based approach over one of consent in relation to these crimes. Why are ministers prioritising a man's right to have banter over a woman's right to feel safe? And will the government look at the regulation of the AI apps such as Nudify and Cloth Off, which are freely available, easy to use, and exist only to humiliate and violate women?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the honourable member's passion for this area. It's why we put it in the Online Safety Act in regards to the sharing of this content. And now we have gone one step further and made it illegal, well, we're in the process of making it illegal to create this content in the first place.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is clear that artificial intelligence is the defining technology of our time, with the potential to transform humanity positively. But it also recognises the challenges that AI can pose. As has already been said, we are working to ensure that we respond to the full range of threats to our democratic processes, including through the DEFDEM task force. DCIT is engaging with social media platforms, civil society groups, academia and international partners to tackle the risks AI can pose to democracy.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the longer term, I absolutely agree. AI has enormous potential to support participation in politics, and we should seek to harness that. But in the short term, disinformation and deepfakes, often put together by foreign actors, threaten to have the most immediate impact on democracy. So what risk does he believe that AI poses to this year's election in particular, and what steps is he taking to alleviate those risks?
Mr. Speaker, let me be very, very clear. The UK will not tolerate malicious cyber activity targeting our democratic institutions. We've already had the Deputy Prime Minister come to this dispatch box and take definitive action where that has happened. DEFDEM and government teams are working collaboratively to ensure that we can respond to threats to our democratic processes, including digitally manipulated content. And the Online Safety Act will also force companies to take proactive, preventative action against illegal state-sponsored content online via the Foreign Interference Offence, including deepfakes and other AI-generated content in scope of the Act.
In 2 short sentences, will the Minister reassure us that AI is not going to destroy not just destroy democracy, but the human race as well?
In 2 sentences, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the government is taking a proactive approach to AI, full stop, and that DEFDEM is working very hard to protect our democratic processes, full stop.
We come to topical Sam Jupp.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want the British people to be able to seize the extraordinary opportunities that AI offers, but that can only happen if we address the risks. At Bletchley Park, we kick-started a global conversation, and since then, the Bletchley Effect has seen countries from around the world collaborating on the development of safe, responsible and trustworthy AI. 2 weeks ago, I signed an agreement with the United States allowing us to collaborate seamlessly on AI safety testing, and last week, we announced the date of the second AI Safety Summit in Seoul. We also remain laser-focused on implementing the landmark Online Safety Act, which will make Britain the safest place to be online. And last month, we saw the first sentencing under the cyber flashing offences that we brought in January.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A fast and reliable internet connection is vital for everyday life and so many local businesses. I conducted a broadband survey in East Devon. Some rural parts of my constituency still sadly lag behind: Sidbury, Fluxton, Marsh Green and Tallerton. What steps is the government taking to make sure that broadband providers improve connections across our county?
Well, I'm glad to say that over 75% of premises in his constituency can access gigabit-capable broadband. That's up from 6% in 2019. But we want to do more, so we've included Mid and East Devon in our cross-regional framework for Project Gigabit, and that's currently undertaking pre-procurement market engagement, and we hope to be giving news very soon.
Shall the Secretary Peter Kyle?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first act of this Prime Minister was to promise a government of professionalism and integrity. Yet here we have a Secretary of State who uses her position to accuse a British scientist of being a terrorist sympathiser. She goes on to use public money to settle her libel, and then she tries to cover up just how much taxpayers' money she wasted. Can she tell the House, are these the actions of someone with integrity and professionalism? Yes or no?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister responsible for UKRI, officials in my department alerted me to a tweet which stated, "This is disturbing. Suella Braverman urges police to crack down on Hamas support in the UK," with no further context or wording. This was posted by a representative of an EDI board that sits under UKRI. At the time, like many others, I was indeed concerned and used the forum in which she used to alert UKRI to my concerns. This was highlighted using that medium, but on receipt of the letter, UKRI CEO themselves said that they were deeply concerned and launched an investigation.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr. Speaker, WhatsApp can be very handy, but it can also be very dangerous. Its end-to-end encryption means even the most vile illegal content like child sexual abuse cannot be policed or prevented. Given the obvious dangers to children, does she agree that it is woefully irresponsible of Meta to reduce the age for WhatsApp to 13?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are pro-innovation but also pro-privacy. However, it is clearly not right for anyone to be exposed to such harms as sexual abuse, extortion or grooming on any service. Platforms must have robust processes in place to safeguard children in response to the Online Safety Act. Responsible encryption has an important role to play in protecting privacy, but it shouldn't compromise safety, and Ofcom will take robust action when this is compromised.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. At the Lord Science Committee, the Secretary of State said there had been no surveillance of academics in that case. Mr. Speaker, what was the evidence which she based her decision to write to the UKRI Chief Exec on then?
Mr. Speaker, I've answered that multiple times. An official alerted me to these concerns. I then saw the tweet myself, and also I asked the department for further advice.
The Kettering-based company Intertech is the only company in the world that can manufacture and completely recycle circuit board technology. The potential for it and for the UK is huge. Would the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation be kind enough, please, to visit Intertech in Kettering to see this groundbreaking innovation for himself?
Mr. Speaker, Intertech is indeed a great example of innovation in sustainable electronics. I was pleased that they've benefited from £250,000 in UK support, and it would be my pleasure to visit my honourable friend's constituency in Kettering, and I believe we've got a date soon.
Gregory Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, Northern Ireland should have virtually 100% access to fibre broadband, which is a first in any of these islands, following the confidence and supply agreement with the previous government. Does he agree with me that regions like Northern Ireland and other regions in the UK should take full advantage of that broadband access to maximise employment opportunities across these islands?
Absolutely, he's right about the importance of gigabit broadband to the economy. And I'm very glad to say that 95% of Northern Ireland has that access. So it's the highest percentage in the country, and that's attributed to the work done between the central government and the Assembly.
Sir Edward Lee.
Why should people living in rural areas be second-class citizens when it comes to mobile phone coverage?
Well, we agree. That's why we have the Shared Rural Network programme that is dealing with a lot of those not-spot problems.
Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, the number of black students entering into STEM are leaving in great numbers. So can you say what you're doing to identify the challenges and what you're doing to help progression of black students in STEM?
Mr. Speaker, the government is absolutely committed to expanding STEM opportunities. A key way of doing that is building mathematical capabilities, helping girls and minorities stick with maths. That's why the Prime Minister announced our ambition to see all young people receive maths education until aged 18.
Final question, Nigel Mills.
Amber Valley has a high incidence of respiratory disease, so what more can the government do to increase investment in research into respiratory conditions in the areas that need that research the most? I'm clinging on to
the Medical Research Council is benefiting from the highest ever level of research spend. I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to talk about what more we can do in this important area.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Sir Lane Saxby.
Question 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are joined today in the gallery by postmasters caught up in the Horizon IT scandal. It is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our history, and that is why we've introduced a bill to quash convictions, delivered schemes to ensure swift compensation, and established an independent inquiry. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Sir Lane Saxby.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree towns like Barnstaple, the main transport hub in North Devon, serving hundreds of square miles, should have a fully functioning bus station, as Lib Dem-run North Devon Council has not reopened ours since the pandemic, leaving residents out in the cold with no public facilities? As people start to feel the difference with tax cuts and falling inflation, does he agree we should be making it easier for people to use the bus, come to town and support Barnstable's local economy? And will my right honourable friend join me in calling on the Lib Dems to get on with reopening the bus station?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we know how vital bus services are for communities right across the country. That's why we're providing Devon with £17 million to deliver better bus services, and we introduced the £2 fare bus cap. But I know my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, was recently visiting my honourable friend, seeing the benefits of reopening Barnstable bus station, and it's clear that the local Liberal Democrats should just get on and do it.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Can I too welcome the postmasters in the gallery in their quest for justice? And Mr. Speaker, this week we marked 35 years since the disaster at Hillsborough, and the enduring courage and determination of the families must be marked by the passing of a Hillsborough law. Mr. Speaker, we also lost Lord Richard Rosser, a lifelong member of the Labour Party. He will be greatly missed, and our thoughts are with his wife Sheena, his family and friends. Mr. Speaker, I'm privileged to be the proud owner of a copy of the former Prime Minister's new book. It's a rare, unsigned copy. It's the only unsigned copy. It's quite the read. She claims the Tory party's disastrous kamikaze budget that triggered chaos for millions was, her words, the happiest moment of her premiership. Has the Prime Minister met anyone with a mortgage who agrees?
Well, Mr. Speaker, all I'd say is he ought to spend a bit less time reading that book and a bit more time reading the Deputy Leader's tax advice.
I think we'll have less talking. I want to get through PMQs. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, we've got a billionaire Prime Minister and a billionaire Prime Minister, both of whose families have used schemes to avoid millions of pounds of tax, smearing a working-class woman. And the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, has a long list of people to blame for the economic misery. They don't want to hear it. They made her Prime Minister, and millions of people are paying the price. She's got a long list of people to blame. She blames the Governor of the Bank of England, the Treasury, the Office for Budget Responsibility. The American President is blamed at one point. We even learned that the poor old lettuce was part of the deep state. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's actually much simpler than that? It was the Tories' unfunded tax cuts, tens of billions of pounds of unfunded tax cut, that crashed the economy and left millions paying more on their mortgages, wasn't it?
Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that 2 years ago I wasn't afraid to repeatedly warn about what her economic policies would lead to, even if it wasn't what people wanted to hear at the time. Mr. Speaker, I was right then, but I'm also right now when I say that his economic policies would be a disaster for Britain. He would send inflation up, mortgages up and taxes up, and working people would pay the price.
Well, I appreciate the Prime Minister having the stomach to say it out loud, but everyone knows it's the Tory party's obsession with wild, unfunded tax cut that crashed the economy. We know it, he knows it, they know it, and the whole country is living it. So when is he finally going to learn the lesson from his predecessor's mistakes and explain where the money is coming from for his own completely unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance?
Mr. Speaker, when my predecessor was running for leader, to use his words, I did have the stomach to argue out loud about her economic policies, had the conviction to say that they were wrong. But not once, but twice, he tried to make his predecessor Prime Minister. Despite him opposing NATO and Trident, ignoring anti-Semitism and siding with our enemies. It's clear what he did. He put his own interests ahead of Britain's.
I think actually when he was running for Prime Minister, for leader, he was explaining how he's funneling money from poor areas to pay it into richer areas. We know what his record is. I notice he's not denying the £46 billion promise to scrap the national insurance, but he's refusing to say where the money will come from. And we've been trying for months to get to the bottom of this. So now's his chance. No more spin, no more waffle, no more diversion. I know that'll be difficult. He can either, Mr. Speaker, this is the choice, he can either cut state pension or the NHS that national insurance funds, that's route one, or he can put up income tax. Which one is it?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've just cut taxes by £900 for a typical worker. We've delivered the biggest tax cut for businesses since the 1980s. But while we're cutting taxes, Labour is already putting them up. In Wales, putting up taxes right now for small businesses. In Birmingham, putting up council tax by 21%. And in London, his mayor has put up taxes by 70%, Mr. Speaker. And this is just a glimpse of what they'd do if they got in power. A few weeks ago, he finally admitted it to The Sun. What would he say he would do? I quote, he said, "We would put up taxes." It's always the same, Mr. Speaker. Higher taxes and working people paying the price.
No single politician has ever put tax up more times than he has. But Mr. Speaker, just hang on, because he was given the chance. He was just given the chance to rule out cutting the NHS or state pensions to pay for scrapping this. No, he's. I was a lawyer long enough to know when someone's avoiding the question. So I'm going to give him another chance. Will he now rule out cuts the NHS, cuts the state pension, or putting up taxes to pay for his unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, I make absolutely no apology about wanting to end the unfairness of the double taxation on work, Mr. Speaker. The NHS is receiving record funding under this Conservative government. Pensioners have just received a £900 increase under this government. But if he wants to talk about tax, let's have a look at what Labour's brand newly appointed tax advisor has to say. This advisor thinks that supporting pensioners is a complete disgrace, Mr. Speaker. He believes their free TV licences are ridiculous. And if it wasn't bad enough, this advisor has called for increases in income tax, in national insurance and VAT. It all makes sense now. That's who the Shadow Chancellor's been copying and pasting from.
So this is genuinely extraordinary. Two chances to rule out, Mr. Speaker, two chances to rule out cuts to state pension, cuts to the NHS, or income tax rises to fund his promise to abolish national insurance.
Order. Mr. Holden, I want you to set a good example, not a bad one. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this really matters. He's had two chances to rule out these cuts to NHS, cuts to tax or pensions or tax rise. This matters to millions of people watching who want to know what's going to happen to their NHS and pensions. It really does matter to millions of people who are watching. So I'll be really generous now and give him one last chance. Very simple, very clear. Is his £46 billion promise to abolish national insurance being paid for by cuts to the NHS, cuts to the state pension, or yet another Tory tax rise?
Mr. Speaker, he's really got to keep up, Mr. Speaker, right? It's this government that's just delivered a £900 increase to the state pension. It's this government that's already committed to the triple lock for the next Parliament. He had 6 opportunities. I didn't think I heard him say that, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to the NHS, you'd much rather be treated in Conservative-run NHS in England, not the Labour-run NHS in Wales, Mr. Speaker. But it's another week where all we heard is political sniping, Mr. Speaker, not a word about their plans for the country. He's failed to acknowledge that since we last met, taxes have been cut by £900, state pensions gone up, free childcare has been expanded, wages have risen for 9 months in a row, Mr. Speaker, and just today, inflation down again to 3.2%. Our plan is working and the Conservatives are delivering a brighter future for Britain.
Mr. Speaker, you will not be surprised to learn that I very much welcome the £20 million allocated to Carlton in my Gedling constituency as part of the long-term plan for towns. But I am very eager to see that this money is spent according to local wishes. I know there will be consultations following the setting up of the Towns Board, so will my right honourable friend join me in urging Carlton residents to take part in those forthcoming consultations, to make sure their voices are heard and to ensure that this money is spent where the people want?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his tireless campaigning on behalf of the residents of Carlton. Our long-term plan for towns means that 75 towns across the country, including Carlton, will benefit from £20 million each to invest in their local area. But crucially, as he said, that will be in the hands of local people deciding on their priorities for the place that we live, whether it's regenerating local high streets, investing in parks and green spaces, or tackling antisocial behaviour. We're levelling up across the country, and he deserves enormous praise for his role in securing that investment.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, a former Prime Minister who oversaw a financial crash before being unceremoniously turfed from office told the public the truth, and I'm not referring to that one, Mr. Speaker. Because on Monday, Gordon Brown told the people of these Isles that the forces pulling Britain apart are greater than the forces holding it together. So maybe the Prime Minister can find some time this afternoon to perhaps agree with just one of his predecessors.
Well, Mr. Speaker, where I do agree with my predecessor very strongly is that Scotland would be far stronger inside the United Kingdom.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, of course, where Gordon Brown was also correct was in stating that Scottish independence is not simply off the agenda. And indeed, those remarks were echoed just yesterday by the General Secretary of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, who stated that it remains an unresolved issue, Mr. Speaker, before going on to state, and I confirm, and they may laugh at her, but she said, that can be a very dangerous place to end up in when you are not allowing people to express their wishes in a democratic manner. So may I ask the Prime Minister, does he welcome the fulsome, wholehearted and warm support of the Labour Party in denying the people of Scotland that opportunity to have a say over their own future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we did have a democratic vote on that topic, but what I would suggest to the SNP is that rather than obsessing about independence and indeed wasting time cracking down on free speech and trying to lock up J.K. Rowling, he should focus on what the people of Scotland actually care about: schools, hospitals, jobs and our new tax cuts.
Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I abhor a two-tier policing system, and we must ensure that everyone's treated equally under the rule of law. The Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who investigated the Beergate scandal handed their police chief constable a new 3-year contract whilst the investigation into the Labour Party leader and deputy leader was ongoing. Now, 2 former Labour MPs are overseeing the force due to investigate the opposition deputy leader. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that complete transparency throughout this investigation is of the utmost importance?
Yeah, my right honourable friend makes an important point. A key principle of our country is that there are the same rules for everyone. And when it comes to this topic, I do think the Labour leader should show some leadership. To avoid stop reading the legal advice, simply just publish it and get a grip of the situation. And it says a lot about his priorities, that when it comes to his famed legal expertise, he's more than happy to help defend Hizb ut-Tahrir, but refuses to help his own deputy leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recently published Canova report makes it absolutely clear that the IRA was riddled with British agents from top to bottom. Those agents were involved in abduction, torture and murder of British and Irish citizens. The British government, successive British governments, knew all about it and did nothing. The report also calls for an apology from the government to those victims. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity now to make that apology?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will know, this is an interim report. As the Secretary of State has laid out, we can't comment on the findings until we get the final report, but we would never condone wrongdoing where there is evidence of this. But I will say this also, because it's not said enough. The overwhelming majority of the police, armed forces and intelligence services served with great distinction. They defended democracy in the face of some horrendous violence, and without their service and their sacrifice, there would have been no peace process. They helped ensure that the future of Northern Ireland will never be decided by violence, but by the consent of its people.
Sir Simon Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me? We don't agree on everything, but we do agree on this, that if anyone wants to see why this government has introduced strong mayors, they need only look to Ben Houchen in the Tees Valley. Because from saving our airport to introducing our free port to bringing steelmaking back, Ben delivers. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that the best thing that Ben has done is do this without charging any mayoral tax, which his Labour opponent would need to do to fund his unfunded spending plans?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the great work of Ben Houchen, and I share his concerns about the pledges of the Labour candidate. Over £130 million of unfunded spending, showing that Labour can't be trusted. And we all see the results of this, Mr. Speaker, in Labour-run Birmingham. Taxes going up by 20%. And that is the story of what Labour in local government means. Working people paying the price, and it's exactly why he and I completely agree on this, the people of Teesside should vote Ben Houchen and vote Conservative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last year in Shropshire, 10,000 people waited for more than 24 hours in A&E. That's 10,000 people over 65 waiting on hard plastic chairs or in trolleys in our accident and emergency department. The Prime Minister tells us he's got a plan for the NHS, but what people in North Shropshire want to know is how long they are going to have to wait for him to get on and fix the issues where we are.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with the record funding that we're putting into the NHS, our urgent emergency care plan is delivering more ambulances, more beds, but also faster discharge through our hospitals to speed the flow, and that plan is working. Of course, there's more to do, but this winter we saw ambulance and A&E waiting times improve from the year before for the first time in many years, and if we stick to the plan, we'll continue to deliver improvement for her constituents and everyone else.
Gareth Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2010, somebody earning £15,000 a year paid £1,700 in income tax. Today, somebody earning £15,000 a year pays less than £500 of tax. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that this has helped create jobs, growth and self-reliance?
My honourable friend is quite right, and because of our plan, the economy, after a tough few years, has indeed turned the corner. Inflation has fallen from over 11% to 3.2%. It's forecast to return back to target in just a few months, a year ahead of expectations. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we've been able to cut people's taxes, a tax cut, as he mentioned, worth £900 for an average worker, which, by the way, is part of our plan to end the long-term unfairness of the double taxation on work.
Sir Aldney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 years ago, my constituent Juliana was drugged and raped by her then boyfriend. After his conviction, Juliana was advised that reading a transcript of his trial would help her to come to terms with her experience. But when she requested that transcript, she was told that she would have to pay more than £7,000. Astonishingly, Juliana is not alone. I have heard about victims who have been quoted fees of up to £22,000 just to read trial transcripts that are part of their own story. Mr. Speaker, justice should not have a price tag. The Liberal Democrats' amendment to the Victims' Bill would give all victims the right to read sentencing remarks and summings up free of charge. Juliana is here in the gallery today, and she asks if the Prime Minister will support that amendment. Will he look her in the eye and say yes?
Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely sorry to hear about Juliana's case, and my sympathies with her and indeed her family. We are committed to improving victims' access to court transcripts to help them move on and rebuild their lives. We already offer a free service to families of homicide victims, for example, and that's why we have already committed to a one-year pilot to help identify the current demand, inform our next steps, and alongside this, we're actively looking at other options to immediately reduce the costs.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, Bracknell Forest Council has a particular challenge with special educational needs, and I'm keen to support them. I am grateful to the Government for the recent SEN review, the significant increase in resources and the bespoke safety valve programme for Bracknell, but additional school places are needed now. Could the Prime Minister please agree today to release the funding for our new SEN units at Sandhurst and Edgebarrow schools and commit to fully funding up front our new SEN school in Crowthorne?
Can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting how Bracknell Forest Local Authority has worked positively with the department through the Safety Valve programme, and as part of that agreement, over the next few years the council will receive £16 million in extra funding to provide the vital education that my honourable friend's constituents deserve. I'm told that the department is still reviewing capital bids for the Safety Valve programme, but they will be in touch with local authorities directly as soon as possible.
Daniel Zeitler.
In the exchanges earlier, we didn't hear much of a defence from the Prime Minister of his predecessor, so perhaps he could tell the House, what does he consider to be her greatest achievement?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, while the party opposite were busy trying to take us back into the EU and reverse the referendum result, my predecessor was signing trade deals around the world, which have now meant, Mr. Speaker, that Brexit Britain has overtaken the Netherlands, France and Japan to become the fourth largest exporter in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Claire Massey, and one of her two children almost lost their lives in a fire at her home in February 2023. Since then, Claire has been a victim of bullying by aggressive claims handlers and negligent and unprofessional conduct, including violating a policy and withdrawing alternative accommodation by the insurer, Policy Expert, part of the accredited Insurance Europe Group and Limited Trinity Claims Management. Claire has raised institutional failings with the Financial Conduct Authority, which appears toothless. She's also successfully raised individual issues with the Financial Ombudsman, but the delaying tactics of the insurance means she's no closer to a resolution. Claire is here in the gallery today and is asking, will the Prime Minister meet with her and me to look at how we can better protect consumers against bad practices in the insurance industry? And does he agree with me that it is time to establish an Office of the Whistleblower?
My honourable friend is an excellent campaigner on behalf of her constituent, and can I extend my sympathies to Claire and her family. Whilst I can't comment on individual cases, I'm sure she'll understand, I know that the Financial Conduct Authority does have the powers that it needs to take action against firms that breach its rules, and further customers can contact the Financial Ombudsman Service, whose decisions are binding on insurers. But I will immediately ensure that the relevant minister meets with my honourable friend to look more closely at the specific issue and the case that she raises.
Ukrainian Member of Parliament Mykola Stefanchuk is in the public gallery this afternoon. I'm sure we all wish to welcome him and wish Ukraine, Slava Ukraine. Mykola has told me that Ukraine has the people, Ukraine has the courage, but Ukraine does not currently have the weapons and the air defence to secure her freedom. In light of today's Russian attack on Chernihiv this morning, which has killed at least 10 and injured many more, can I ask the Prime Minister, will he respond to President Zelensky's statement that this would not have happened if Ukraine had received sufficient air defence equipment?
Mr. Speaker, it was a pleasure to address members of the Ukrainian Parliament when I visited Ukraine earlier this year. Indeed, it was my first foreign visit of the year. I was the first foreign leader to visit Ukraine and President Zelensky to demonstrate our strong support for the Ukrainian people at their moment of struggle against Russian aggression. We've increased the amount of support that we've given to Ukraine this year, indeed the first major country to do so, and a big part of that support concerns air defence, where we have led in supporting Ukraine's efforts. We'll continue to do so, and also continue to encourage other countries around the world to step up and match our leadership, because we all want to see a future for Ukraine based on freedom from tyranny.
Mr. Speaker, on a recent visit to Pimlico in my constituency, the Prime Minister heard directly from local people concerned about the eye-watering rise in violent crime and robberies. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the London Labour Mayor has failed to take advantage of extra government funding to recruit more police, and that on the 2nd of May, Londoners can send him a very clear message: he's let them down?
Mr. Speaker, Sadiq Khan is failing London. While burglary is down across England, it's up in London. Violent crime down across England, but up in London. And the Labour Mayor is the only one of 43 police and crime commissioners to have missed his police recruitment target. Londoners will have a chance, Mr. Speaker, to cast their vote on the 2nd of May, and I hope that they kick him out, because we all know they'll be safer with Susan Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My local community is reeling from the discovery of 35 bodies and unidentifiable cremated ashes at a local funeral home. Their pain has been made worse when they realise the funeral plans they'd used their life savings for were fake. Does the Prime Minister agree that in these unique and limited circumstances, banks should offer discretion when deciding if chargeback applies to payment refunds?
Can I express my sympathies to the families affected by the case that the Honourable Lady raises? I believe that Ministry of Justice are urgently looking at the matter that she's raised. I'll ensure that someone gets in touch with her as soon as possible.
Derek Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Robotic surgery allows laparoscopic surgery to be performed with increased precision, flexibility and control. This can result in reduced patient complication rates, reduced length of stay in hospital and reduced hospital readmissions. However, there is currently no robotic surgery provision in Cornwall. As a result, residents of Cornwall have to travel to Devon for robotic procedures, a journey of more than 80 miles, 120 miles if you're from Ellerslie, for West Cornwall and Ellerslie residents. Will my friend the PM the Prime Minister commit to ring-fence capital funding for Cornwall to establish a robotic surgery service and address the health inequalities our constituents have lived with for far too long?
Can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting the potential of this innovative technology for patient care. I'm delighted to see that more generally Cornwall is benefiting from our new hospital programme, providing a new women's and children's hospital in the centre of Royal Cornwall, which he and I discussed when I was last with him. But I can also tell him that NHS England are actively exploring opportunities to expand robotic-assisted surgery. Any decisions on funding new allocations will factor in health inequalities, such as areas with less access to robots today, and I will ensure that the current access to robotic surgery in my honourable friend's local community is appropriately considered by the relevant Health Minister.
George Galloway.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister told us on Monday that he was off to make a telephone call to Mr. Netanyahu to urge restraint on a government that has killed and maimed well over 100,000 people in 6 months, 72% of them women and children. Can you tell us how the telephone call went and what he will do if his advice is not taken and an unrestrained war begins?
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who thanked the UK for their support of Israel's security over the weekend. We also discussed the situation and how Iran is isolated on the world stage, and also I made the point to him that significant escalation is not in anyone's interest, and it's a time for calm heads to prevail. I also reiterated our concerns about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, where I welcome the statements and commitments that the Israeli government have made about significantly increasing aid into Gaza, and now we need to see those commitments delivered.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you. The residents in Smalley and Denby are now faced by two huge solar farm applications with only a 500-metre gap between them. And both sites are wholly in the Greenbelt. So would the Prime Minister agree we should change planning guidance to make it absolutely clear that productive farms in the Greenbelt are not the right place for solar farms, and the investment and the time being spent should go on sites that might be appropriate, like car parks or brownfield land or roofs of industrial buildings, rather than wasting people's time and causing fear like this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right that particularly at a time of increased geopolitical risk, we must protect our nation's food security and therefore our most valuable agricultural land. We do want to see more solar, which is one of the cheapest forms of energy, but, as he said, on brownfield sites, rooftops, and away from our best agricultural land. And that's why our recently published National Infrastructure Planning Rules set out the requirement for solar not to be placed on what is described as best and most valuable versatile land where possible. The Energy and Environment Secretaries are ensuring that developers and planning authorities strike the right balance so that we can deliver what he wants, which is more British food grown here at home.
That's from McKinnell.
Out recently with Chris McEwen, the mayoral candidate in Teesside, it was clear that residents are really worried about crime. Levels in Tory-run Teesside are some of the highest in the country. Residential burglary rate is 52% higher than anywhere else in the country. When will the Prime Minister realise that he's not only lost control of his party, but of crime in this country too?
Mr. Speaker, what a joke, right? But we've got police and crime commissioner elections across the country, and the honourable lady really should look at the record. Under this government, crime has been cut by 50%. 20,000 more police officers. But here are the facts, and this is why it's so extraordinary to hear what she said. People with a Labour police and crime commissioner are more likely to be victims of burglary and twice as likely to be victims of robbery. The facts completely speak for themselves. Vote Conservatives for safer streets.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every month, my constituents see the Labour-run Warrington Council spend nearly £4.5 million on interest payments to cover their £1.8 billion debt. Borrowing they've used to spend on an energy company that went bust, offices in Birmingham and Manchester, and even a business park that they purchased through an offshore company, presumably to avoid paying tax. Does the Prime Minister agree with me It's time to send in the inspectors. Warrington Council has gone too far in its money-making schemes, and local councils should focus on delivering great services, and the way to achieve that is vote Conservative on the 2nd of May.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this year the government announced a further £600 million in extra funding for local councils, a real terms increase as it has done every single year of this Parliament. But we all know what happens when Labour are in charge, whether it is racking up debt in Warrington, as my honourable friend said, the 21% council tax increase in Labour-run Birmingham, or indeed slashing services in Nottingham, or, as I just said, higher crime on average in each Labour Police and Crime Commissioner area. It's crystal clear, Mr. Speaker, that whenever Labour are in charge, it's working people that pay the price.
Mr. Speaker, while 64,000 people are on the waiting list for a council house in the West Midlands, families are living in hotels, in cold and damp homes and mouldy flats. The Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, has built 46 social homes in 8 years. Does the Prime Minister think that is good enough?
Mr. Speaker, Andy Street is absolutely delivering for the West Midlands. Unlike the Labour Mayor in London, he's delivered on all his housing targets, in fact. But it's the Labour-run council in Birmingham that's imposing on her constituents and others a 21% council tax rise. And what are they getting in exchange for that? 600 job losses, cuts to services, and on some streets, they're even turning off the lights, Mr. Speaker. I tell you, what Labour have done to Birmingham, the Conservatives will never let them do to Britain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I just ask the Prime Minister to thank his right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, for further meetings with Hitachi this morning, indeed with the union representatives. We're all glad to see what's happened with Alstom yesterday, but it's important that we do the same to support the factories up at Hitachi in Aycliffe.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for his role in championing the rail industry in the UK. As he rightly said, the Department for Transport and the Secretary of State have been actively engaged with companies to ensure we have a robust supply chain. And as he knows, we're investing record amounts in rail investment, particularly in the north, and we're pleased to see that that's being delivered.
Question, Nasha.
Speaker. The Prime Minister is no doubt aware of the collapse of SSB law, and many constituents, including hundreds in my constituency, have been affected and have bills of hundreds, up to hundreds of thousands. One constituent had to sell his wedding gifts, and his father had a heart attack with the stress. People are having to pay, literally raid their pension pots and getting bills and bailiffs knocking on the door. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and my constituents, representatives of the collapse of SSB law, and make sure the government responds to something that is an injustice that's happened to people across the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to hear about the situation impacting the honourable lady's constituents. I'll be more than happy to make sure the right Minister looks into it and we get back to her as soon as possible.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Right, with the Chamber's now cleared, we now come to the urgent question. Shadow Secretary of State, David Lammy for...
Mr. Speaker, I ask an urgent question to ask the Secretary of State if he will make a statement on the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Foreign Secretary is regrettably unable to respond to this question in person, as he is in the World Bank Spring meetings in Washington. I will respond on his behalf. Earlier this month, we passed a grim milestone, 6 months since Hamas's horrific terrorist attack on Israel. The UK government has been working with partners across the region to secure the release of hostages, including British nationals. We want to see the release of all hostages. Palestinian civilians have spent these months suffering, with conditions worsening by the day. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire. The Iran attack and our support for Israel have not changed our focus on ensuring Israel meets its commitments to enable at least 500 aid trucks a day to enter Gaza, to open Ashdod port for aid deliveries, expand the Jordan land corridor, open a crossing into northern Gaza, and extending hours at Kerem Shalom and at Nitzana. We're pushing as hard as we can to get aid to Palestinian civilians, and as this House knows, we've been urging Israel at the highest levels to take immediate action on the bottlenecks holding up humanitarian relief. We have recently seen a small increase in the number of aid trucks being allowed to enter Gaza, but not all of them are full, and numbers are not yet close to reaching the levels required, given the severity of the humanitarian situation we now see. We will continue to press Israel to take immediate action to open Ashdod fully for humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, we recently announced new support for a life-saving aid corridor by sea to Gaza, including the deployment of a Royal Navy ship, which has now arrived in the Mediterranean and is ready to integrate with the US pier and provide a command and control platform. We're also committing up to $9.7 million for aid deliveries through this corridor, as well as providing logistical expertise and equipment. In recent weeks, the Royal Air Force has conducted 7 airdrops along the Gazan coast, delivering more than 58 tonnes of food. And UK Med's field hospital, funded by the UK, is up and running in Gaza. It's treated more than 8,000 people already, a high proportion of them children. We need to see the operating environment within Gaza improve, so that as more aid gets in, it can be distributed quickly, safely and effectively. Israel must ensure the UN has the access, equipment and staff it needs to do this. We were horrified by the attack on the World Central Kitchen convoy, which killed 7 aid workers, including 3 very dedicated British nationals. Israel must do more to protect aid workers, including guaranteed deconfliction for aid convoys and other humanitarian work to ensure they can operate safely. The findings of Israel's investigation must be published in full and followed up with a wholly independent review to ensure the utmost transparency and accountability. 6 months on, Mr. Speaker, however much we might wish otherwise, the fighting has not yet come to an end. We cannot and will not stand by. The Foreign Secretary is in the region this week, pressing for further action.
Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you for granting me this urgent question. Conditions in Gaza are desperate and intolerable. Famine is taking hold. There is sewage pooling in the streets. The water has still not been switched back on. Almost nothing is reaching northern Gaza, where people are already dying of starvation. The healthcare system has been utterly devastated. Yesterday, leading NGOs told me about specific blocks and restrictions they face from Israeli authorities in doing their life-saving work. Aid sat waiting, unable to reach those in need, some rotting where they stood. Items removed from trucks without explanation. Doctors are reusing single-use medical equipment from patients who have died. The UN report today said 10,000 women have been killed. Mr. Speaker, this is a description of hell on earth, and it cannot go on. For months, we've demanded that aid flow without restrictions, unfettered, unimpeded, at a level to meet humanitarian need. The UN Security Council has demanded it. The ICJ has ordered it. But despite the pledges made, UN figures show that there was more aid going in some days in January than there was yesterday. So I have 3 questions for the government. First, can the Minister be clear that Israel is not meeting its commitments, and what pressure is the government applying to change that? Second, why has the government not yet announced it's restoring funding to UNRWA? It's shocking that in the face of famine, the UK is one of the last major donors that has not yet resumed funding without explanation. Third, why is the government seemingly softening its message to Netanyahu on Rafah? Let us be clear, 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering there have nowhere safe to go. Mr. Speaker, there can't be a humanitarian operation to meet the scale of need without an immediate ceasefire now. Both sides must agree to comply, and we note that it is Hamas and their leader Sinwar which rejected the latest ceasefire deal. They must urgently agree to end this war now, to prevent the further loss of innocent life, to free the hostages still cruelly held by Hamas, to allow a surge of aid into Gaza.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Important points have been made, and I think it's important to welcome that Israel's commitments to increase the amount of aid getting into Gaza and the limited steps that have been made. But, this is an important but, more must be done, as the Right Honourable Gentleman was saying, to realise these commitments. And we continue to urge this. As I said, the Foreign Secretaries in the region, we're working hard on these issues. The Right Honourable Gentleman also talked about UNRWA. The final report from Kelowna is due at the end of April. We'll review that and then make a decision on the future funding. We do recognise the important role that UNRWA plays. And on the wider point, the more strategic point as well, in terms of our approach, it's very clear we want to see a humanitarian pause and then push for the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire.
Sir Oliver Hill.
Right honourable friend, agree with me that the position of the hostages is absolutely key to this. And is he able to report any more progress? I mean, he's explained that Hamas have not agreed to the latest situation. But doesn't he agree with me that pressure needs to be put on them by their interlocutors who are working with them to really do something solid on the hostage problem and do it speedily?
The government continues to call for an immediate humanitarian pause, as we said, to allow for the release of hostages. While we cannot provide a running commentary on negotiations, which are highly sensitive and ongoing, the UK is using all of our diplomatic channels to support international negotiation efforts being facilitated by Egypt, Qatar and the US.
We come to SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker, understandably, perhaps the world's attention has been on the shocking Iranian missile attack at the weekend, but we cannot and we must not forget about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the plight of millions of innocent civilians facing a man-made famine and living with the constant threat of attack. Neither can we forget those immensely brave humanitarian aid workers, particularly the 7 World Central Kitchen employees whose status as humanitarians appears to have offered them little or no protection from the IDF. And despite the promises made, the United Nations has reported that this week more than 40% of what they tried to take into Gaza was rejected. And those of us who have been to the border and have seen the efforts of the Egyptian Red Crescent and their warehouse full of rejected medical equipment have a pretty good idea what those items were. And this is an area which has no single operational hospital. But the elephant in the room is arms export licences. And for how much longer is the UK going to send humanitarian aid to Gaza while simultaneously licensing weapons sales to Israel? And wouldn't the best form of humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza be to end supplying Israel with the weapons that will kill them?
The honourable gentleman is right to highlight what happened in Iran recently, and of course we mustn't forget the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza. We're working very hard to make sure that aid can come through that he talked about. I highlighted that in my opening remarks. He also talked about exports. The latest assessment carried out by the Foreign Secretary leaves our position on export licences unchanged. This is consistent with the advice ministers have received, and will continue to keep this position under review. But he should remember his opening point about Iran and what's happened recently, and I'll leave it there on export controls.
Humanitarian aid getting into the Gaza Strip is very important. And has my right honourable friend noticed in that regard that the White House National Security spokesman said in an interview with NBC in the last couple of days that aid getting into Gaza has increased by a large amount in the last few days. More than 2,000 trucks have been able to get in, about 100 trucks in the last 24 hours alone. 3 bakeries have reopened in northern Gaza in the past week, producing some 3 million pita breads daily, and food aid convoys are now continuing via the newly opened northern crossing. There's always more to do, of course, and as I said, it's very important. but will he accept that there are significant improvements, considering this is still an active war zone?
I'm grateful for the comments from my right honourable friend. As I said in my response to the opposition previously, sorry, can you just remember the question again? Sorry, on...
Just about aid is improving.
Excuse me. Sorry. So we've seen a limited improvement. He says it's been significant. It has, but from a low base. And clearly our aspirations are a lot higher, as I set out before. There are a number of key areas we want to see further improvements. We're working closely with Israel on that. Excuse me.
Select Committee Chair, Sarah Champion.
Minister, airdrops, promises of harbours, promises of money to come. These are not even touching the sides of the scale of the problem. People are starving to death. At the beginning of March, my committee published a report for the UK government to press for more than 500 trucks of humanitarian aid a day to be allowed into Gaza, for all of the crossings to open, for the Israeli military to cooperate better with aid agencies to deconfliction, so that humanitarian workers can live but also safely carry out their vital work. And despite the Foreign Secretary's optimism of greater humanitarian flows, the weekly average is just over 1,100 trucks a week. Why is this government not doing more to persuade Israel to meet its responsibilities under international law and facilitate the aid to the people to Gaza? How many more people have to die?
Minister.
I understand the honourable member's concerns, particularly in her position as chair of the Select Committee, but I have highlighted already that we are pressing incredibly hard with Israel. We are pressing incredibly hard with Israel to make further progress. There has been limited progress, but the Foreign Secretary is in the region and he continues to press for these cases, as does my right honourable friend, the Minister for Development, who's doing important work in this area as well.
Maltese.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to question the Minister again on the same theme, but he will start to appreciate the frustration in the House that over the last 6 months we've heard the government beg, plead, press, have telephone calls, meetings, have conversations, even the RAF in the sky to rightly defend Israel from Iran. And yet it's occurring to many of us that the Israeli government cares little for what we say. To the extent that Medical Aid for Palestinians now report that a famine is all but inevitable over the next few weeks in Gaza. When are we going to realise that saying things is making no difference and we actually have to act, not least to take steps to enforce the judgment of the International Court of Justice? When will we actually do something concrete to save these lives?
Minister.
As I said, we are pressing incredibly hard to make sure that we see further progress in this vital area. And as I highlighted before, one of the key things that we're doing is committing 9.7 million for aid deliveries through the life-saving aid corridor by sea to Gaza. This is a material step. This is action that's being taken. But clearly, we will continue to put pressure on the Israelis. They've made commitments. We want them to stand up and realise, or allow agencies to realise those commitments.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crossings are still not open. Trucks are going in half empty. 41% of requests from the UN to send in aid to northern Gaza are being refused by the Israeli government. That's the reality on the ground. The Colonna report comes out this Saturday, the 20th of April, not the end of the month. When will the government come to this House to tell us when it will reinstate funding to UNRWA, the only aid organisation with the infrastructure on the ground to deliver aid at scale?
As I said, we will be reviewing that report, and when we've received it, we'll make our final decision. We'll come and explain to Parliament what that decision is. And as I also highlighted, and more importantly, as the Development Minister has highlighted, we recognise the vital role that UNRWA plays.
Manchester.
Speaker, the Foreign Secretary was very proud to announce that the United Kingdom has set up a contact group for the Middle East, which has members from Europe, it has from the Middle East and the United States. A key part of that link to the humanitarian situation in Palestine and Gaza is this. The European Commission and some of those members, all those members, have decided to fund UNRWA. They have, and they're part of the contact group to find a solution to the Middle East. And therefore, why is it taking us so long when our European counterparts have made that decision? And linked to that, I asked the Minister to ask the Foreign Secretary, I raised it with him and the Prime Minister to set up an international donors conference for Palestine. We did it with Friends of Syria. We now need to urgently move forward and show our leadership in this matter as the situation is getting very, very, very critical.
Minister.
As I said, I'll say it again, we wait for the final colonial report before we make the decision on UNRWA. The situation around this was particularly concerning, so we need that report to make the decision. And my honourable friend will remember that we have also trebled the amount of aid that we provided to occupied Palestinian territories, and now our task is to make sure that we can and find ways to get that aid in.
Leila Moran.
Yesterday, Oxford doctors Nick Maynard and Deborah Harrington briefed parliamentarians very movingly about their experiences of treating people in Gaza. They impressed on us how important it was that they were kept safe, how many of their colleagues had died, and I'm sure the Minister and the whole House will thank them for their tireless work, and other aid workers and anyone who gives over their safety to save others. They also pointed out that the malnutrition that we are seeing now is making patients more vulnerable to infectious disease. And there is a report released by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine that has projected that if it continues as it is, 74,000 excess deaths, that's beyond those who have died by bombs, will die if something isn't done. So will the Minister agree with me that the only thing that needs to happen now is that immediate bilateral ceasefire, but also a rebuilding of the medical situation in Gaza now, not later, because that is what's stopping people from getting the life-saving treatment they desperately need.
Minister.
I join her in praising the vital work of aid workers in the most challenging of circumstances and highlight the courage and bravery that they demonstrate. And obviously we want to make sure that we create the conditions in which they can operate more safely. She calls for a ceasefire. We call for a pause that can lead to a sustainable ceasefire, which will enable that to happen. And of course, as we move to that situation, then some of the issues she talked about, particularly around providing that extra medical support, can be provided.
Thanks
very much, Mr. Speaker. Access to the north of Gaza for humanitarian aid is still dire. 28 children reported to have died of malnutrition and dehydration. UNRWA continues to be disproportionately affected by access restrictions and was last able to deliver food to northern Gaza at the end of January. Other countries, as we've heard, are restoring funding to UNRWA, including the United States. So why are we taking so long?
Minister.
We want to see the report and we'll make our final decision. We recognise the important role of UNRWA. We also recognise the importance of opening a crossing in northern Gaza, which she highlighted in her opening point, and we are pressing Israel to make sure that they stand up to their commitments.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I attended a meeting of British doctors who've recently been in Gaza, and they described the systematic targeting of healthcare in Gaza. Let's be clear, that is a war crime. A UN Special Rapporteur recently warned a meeting of MPs organised that government ministers and officials involved in arms exports to Israel should be absolutely clear that they could be individually criminally liable for aiding and abetting war crimes in Gaza. So will the Minister say, on the record, in this House and ahead of next week's High Court hearing, that the legal advice the government has received has confirmed that there is no such risk and that arms sales are in line with international law?
Minister.
These assessments we've made on our position on export licences remain unchanged, and this is consistent with the advice that ministers have received. We'll continue to keep this position under review.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As was referenced earlier, our close allies in the United States have commended Israel for stepping up the amount of aid getting into Gaza. Yet once those aid trucks are on the Gazan side of the border, Hamas has sought to hijack the trucks and seek to cynically use the distribution of aid as a political weapon, as recognised by this government. So, can I ask my right honourable friend what assessment he has made of the level of control exercised by Hamas on UNRWA and the distribution of aid?
He makes important points, and that's why we're waiting for this final report, as I've said repeatedly, so we can make a final decision. The underlying situation relating to UNRWA was very, very challenging, and we need to make sure this aid is used for the appropriate purposes. He makes a very important point.
Absolutely.
The government rightly condemned Iran for risking destabilization in the region and demonstrating intent on sowing chaos in its own backyard. Yet we have had 6 months of Israel killing civilians, doctors and aid workers, destroying almost all civilian infrastructure in Gaza, cutting off water, fuel and electricity, and severely limiting the supply of aid. This is all in clear violation of international law, has destabilized the region and sown chaos in Israel's own backyard. So will the Minister condemn the action of Israel then too?
Minister.
Look, we recognise that Israel has the right to defend itself, and we're calling for an immediate pause to get aid in and get the hostages out, as we said. We also recognise the destabilising action of Iran and its acolytes, and we have to make sure we push back and seek to de-escalate the whole situation.
Blackman.
Speaker, by now there could be a humanitarian pause. Aid could be flowing into Gaza to help those poor individuals who are threatened with famine and the war. But of course, just as the last humanitarian pause was breached by Hamas, Hamas refused to accept to having a ceasefire on the terms that have been agreed. That could mean that the hostages could be coming back now. That could mean that the people of Gaza could be receiving the aid. Does he agree with me that Hamas are clearly the obstacle to peace in the Middle East?
Minister.
Clearly, Hamas are an obstacle to peace. Their actions provoked terrible atrocities in Israel back in October, and we find that abhorrent. We do now, though, want to make sure that we can find a way of tackling these terrible humanitarian situations, as I've described, and find a way to destabilise, to tackling destabilising activity, further destabilising activity by Iran.
Paul Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Replying to my written question on the 15th of April, the Minister said, "We want UNRWA to give detailed undertakings about changes in personnel, policy and precedents." Has the Minister or any of his other colleagues actively sought these undertakings and changes from UNRWA by contacting them directly? And if so, on what date was that request last made?
Minister.
The broader issue about UNRWA, obviously, is we're waiting for this final report, and then we can make decisions on the detailed points he's made. I'll raise them with the Development Minister and get back to him.
Nigel Mills.
On the UNRWA funding issue again, would the Minister confirm that it is inconceivable that the money we would earmark for them will not be given this year? So could he either set out what alternative agencies he thinks on the ground could do the same work and achieve the same outcomes, or would he just confirm we're going to have to give them the money anyway, so we may as well get on with it?
Minister.
Look, I've already said that UNRWA do and carry out important work and have a vital role, but the situation, the concerns around their activities mean that we have to have this report, and we want to then look at our approach and our funding in relation to it.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oxfam has reported that 1.1 million people are projected to be facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity in Gaza, and children are now starving. Samantha Power, Administrator of the USAID, told US Congress last week that northern Gaza is now experiencing famine. Does the government share that assessment, and how will aid get there?
Minister.
We continue to be very concerned about the humanitarian challenges that are in place in Gaza. And as I've highlighted to the House, we are pressing really hard. We're taking steps ourselves. We've increased the amount of aid that we're committing to the region. And we're focusing laser-like to seek Israel to step up to the commitments they've made. They've already made some limited progress. We need to see more.
Jameson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Israel's right to self-defence comes with clear responsibility. Gaza has become a conflict hellhole, and the delivery of more humanitarian aid from the international community, including the UN, is non-discretionary. But could the Minister please confirm to the House that everything possible is being done with the Israeli government to ensure that non-combatants are being supported and are not being inadvertently targeted or hit?
We've highlighted this with the Israeli government, and I can confirm to my honourable friend that we are pushing incredibly hard. Not only are we increasing the amount of aid that we've given to the region, highlighted to the region, but we want to make sure that that gets through as well. And we've already deployed a number of airdrops which have helped, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, over 33,000 killed, 70% of whom are women and children. The ICJ has warned of a genocide, and more than 1 million are left starving, while almost 2 million are displaced from their homes. Yet, even as the Foreign Office's own legal advice, which they continually refuse to make public, is purported to declare that the Israeli military are breaking international law, and the UN Security Council pass a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, the reality remains nothing has changed. The bombs are still falling, the children are still starving, and the civilians are still dying. So let me ask the Minister a very simple question. Does international humanitarian law even mean anything anymore when the UK and international community continue to refuse to draw a line?
I understand the passion, I understand his concern about the area, but we continue to have grave concerns about the humanitarian access as well. But this is not sufficient to undermine our judgment that Israel is committed to complying with IHL in general.
Israel's military is reported to be using lavender, an artificial intelligence system, to help choose its bombing targets in Gaza. This is machine decision-making over human decision-making and arguably sacrifices accuracy in favour of speed. The lavender system identifies targets which are only reviewed for 20 seconds before authorisation of a strike. What discussions has the Minister had with MOD colleagues about the use of AI in combat, the concerns over error rates and the humanitarian impact on the ground?
Minister. Too many civilians have been killed, and we want to see Israel take greater care to limit its operations to military targets and avoid harming civilians and destroying homes. That's the message we give to the Israeli government when we engage with them.
John MacDonald.
The situation in Gaza is having its impact on the West Bank. Tragically, this week, a 14-year-old Israeli child was found dead, and that set off a process of settlers rampaging across the West Bank. We now know that 4 Palestinians have been killed and others brutally attacked. The evidence is that the IDF soldiers stood to one side and allowed that to happen. And meeting with Israeli colleagues this morning, we hear that the Israeli government now is arresting legal and peace observers in the West Bank. Could the government now make it very, very clear to the Israeli government that observers should be allowed to operate within the West Bank to ensure that peace is maintained, but also could we have a report now in detail on the sanctions that the government is applying to Israeli settlements and Israeli settlers?
Minister.
I don't know the detail of some of the earlier points that he'd made. I'll welcome receiving that. But in terms of the sanctions, we put them in place. My understanding and memory is that on 2 individuals, we keep this under review constantly, because those actions and what happens in the settlements are important, and the implications it has for the West Bank.
Laura Hammer.
Thank you very much. The
escalation of recent days has been deeply worrying. We have two nuclear-armed countries exchanging ballistics, and neither with any reputation for care about civilian lives, and both with agendas of their own. That escalation has occupied the headlines, but the people of Gaza continue to suffer unrelenting military attacks and starvation. The rules-based order and international law have suffered lasting damage, including by the targeting of aid workers and medics. The UK's influence with an out-of-control Netanyahu government has yielded very little. One of the few legal tools available is the suspension of arms export licences. When will the government use that?
Minister.
As I said in previous answer, our assessment on export licences remain unchanged. We've got one of the world's most robust export systems in the world, enshrined in law through the Export Control Act and implemented through our strategic export licensing criteria. I think it's really important that she recalls and notes not just the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but also what's happening through Iran's destabilising activities as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Humanitarian agencies have concluded that we have passed the point of being able to avert famine in Gaza. Whatever we do now, it will be too late for those people who will have starved to death by the time the aid arrives. That is a stain on the international community. Can the Minister update the House on what specific steps this government has taken to bring about the full implementation of Resolution 2728 passed by the UN Security Council over 3 weeks ago? Pleading, pressuring, pressing the Israeli government clearly is not a strategy that is working. So why doesn't the UK government recognise that consequences and concrete actions can start with the stopping of arms sales to Israel?
Minister.
We are urging, we're pleading, we're doing everything that we can. We're doing everything that we can to make our case. And we're also tripling the amount of aid that we have to 100 million. And, as I said as well, we're taking action to have this life-saving aid corridor by sea to Gaza. These are important actions that we're taking forward.
Colin Lockhart.
Thank you. Having seen the drone attacks on Israel at the weekend, it is disappointing to watch the government and US administration basically telling the Israelis to roll over and accept this aggression by Iran. It was, however, encouraging to see an alliance of air forces assist the Israelis to protect their people. I do wonder why there is little condemnation of this aggression against Israel and continued acknowledgement. Had October the 7th never happened, there would be none of this happening. Therefore, what is this government doing to ensure both Gazans and Israelis are free from Hamas and Iranian aggression respectively and can live normal lives? And as we say in the UK, Israel has the right to defend itself.
Minister.
I agree, the government agrees that Israel does have the right to defend itself, and as part of our approach to finding and putting in place, enabling to put in place a sustainable ceasefire, the role of Hamas has to be put clearly in place. It must not have the influence it has at the moment, and its ability to fire rockets into Israel will need to be completely diminished to enable that sustainable ceasefire to take action.
Stella Creasy.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will know his words are not cutting through. Hamas was wrong to reject the ceasefire, but what Israel does next is not inevitable. And yet the Minister for Defence on Monday evening said that they were waiting for aid to be delivered to Rafah and for civilians to leave, and then they would begin the military operation. He will know there is nowhere for these people to go, and there is no food elsewhere. It is an impossible choice for people. A few pita breads will not cut it for millions of people at risk of starvation and at risk of harm from a military operation in Rafah. So what will the UK do if Israel proceeds with its threat to enter Rafah?
Minister.
As the Honourable Member knows, I respect her enormously, and we've worked together on a number of issues. All I would just say on this, vitally important, is that we want to urge restraint about this proposed military operation by the Israelis. We are also calling for restraint in response to what's happened with Iran, although notably the RAF and others were there to provide support to defend Israel from that attack from Iran. So The Foreign Secretary is in Israel, he's in the region this week to tackle these very issues and address the points that I've made.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, in response to my question about restoring UNRWA funding, the Prime Minister said that, along with allies, he was reviewing the interim findings. In subsequent responses to other honourable members, he said he was waiting for a final report, now which was due at the end of April. We know that this report is due on the 20th. Can we have a government statement on Monday where the government sets out a clear pathway back to restoring funding? The UK is the only major donor, aside from the United States, that have not restored their funding. Time is running out and lives are being lost.
I recognise the importance of the point she's made, and all I would say, as I said previously, we're waiting for the report and then we will update Parliament on our decision. We need to review this report in detail.
George Galloway.
17 repetitions of "we're waiting for the report" will become the new definition of complacency. The more I listen, Mr. Speaker, to both front benches describing the bloody, putrid sea of misery that is Gaza, the more I was amazed that both of them continue to support the supply of British arms and military components to the country that's doing all this. No one could understand that. And the more he said how hard they were trying, and personally I believe him, seems a sincere chap. But why isn't it working? If you're trying so hard while scrambling your jets to defend Israel, giving arms to Israel, why won't they listen to you?
What I say with respect is that the questions that have been asked to me, I think, are entirely appropriate and understandable given the circumstances. I've responded as best I can from the government's perspective. I think the honourable gentleman knows from his extensive experience that the situation on the ground is hugely, hugely complex. We're working night and day. Our officials in SCDO are working flat out. We're providing the support we can for Israel and to help tackle the destabilisation. So I understand the passion that he asked these questions for, but he should also understand these are incredibly complex situations. We're endeavouring to do everything we can with Israel to make our case, but they are also having to think about the implications of what's happening and act after a terrible, tragic attack by Hamas and responses by Iran as well.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned to hear from the Minister that the allegations that have been made by several organisations that the trucks are half full or less going in makes counting the amount of aid getting into Gaza by truck a difficult statistic to use. Can I ask the Minister what he is doing to ensure that tonnage of aid is getting to the right places? Because quite clearly Israel authorities seem to not be able to deliver on their duties under international law to get aid to the right places. And what more can the Minister do to put pressure on Israeli authorities to do what is legally binding and right to do?
Minister. So it's an important point. We need to not just think about the trucks but the tonnage as well. I will speak to Minister Mitchell, the Development Minister on this particular issue as well, and make sure we have extra focus on it. We do need the trucks, we do need the tonnage as well. It's vitally important.
Newland.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to finally hear the Labour frontbench seemingly find its voice on this issue after months and tens of thousands of deaths of shameful prevarication, yet still willing to potentially sell Israeli arms. And on the UK Government's policy, own policy regarding sales, the criteria for halting arms sales does not require a legal confirmation that breaches of international humanitarian law has occurred, only that it might have occurred. Does the Minister not consider the ongoing investigation by the ICC of war crimes and crimes against humanity and the consideration by the ICJ of potential genocide as an indication that breaches of international law might have occurred? In any event, why would we be so keen to sell arms to someone we've been pressing so hard to cease operations?
We continue to have grave concerns about the humanitarian situation on the ground, But this is not sufficient to undermine our judgment that Israel is committed to comply with IHL in general. And we've already talked at length about the export licences and our controls around that. We do recognise that Israel has the right to defend itself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Belgian Foreign Minister stated Israel was engaging in tactics of starvation. Last month, the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Ireland stated the use of starvation as a weapon of war is a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. This month, Belgium's Minister of Development Cooperation stated Israel's use of hunger as a weapon of war was a flagrant violation of international law. The Israeli Defence Minister was on record as saying, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." When will this government wake up to the reality that innocent Palestinians are dying and take actions to stop them from dying from hunger and starvation?
We're working hard to get the aid in, as I've already highlighted. That's absolutely critical. And we're also calling out the Israeli government to make sure that, recognising that too many civilians have been killed, we want to see Israel take greater care to limit its operation to the military targets and avoid harming the civilians and destroying homes, as he's indicated.
Curran Buck.
I think the world is astounded by the fact that we are having to rely upon sea corridors and airdrops for the delivery of aid when we know that the only way that we will prevent starvation in the hell that is Gaza is through mass truck supply and an UNRWA-assisted delivery. Can the Minister explain to us the government's assessment of whether the current supply of aid through trucks, air and sea is sufficient to prevent imminent famine?
Minister.
We've seen limited improvements. I've highlighted that already. But we want to see Israel stand up to its commitment to increase the total number of aid trucks to at least 500 a day and increasing the capacity through the Jordan land corridor to 100 trucks a day. So there's clearly more work that's required. And it's important to highlight as well, it's not just us, this is an international priority where we're working with our other partners.
Tamsing Dessie.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, given the horrific scale of killing and the starvation of Palestinians, especially children, we need an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, and the Netanyahu government must allow unimpeded aid into Gaza rather than continually blocking it. However, there also needs to be a process of investigation, accountability and justice given the serious allegations of war crimes, whether that's through the ICC, the ICJ or the UN Commission of Inquiry. But the UK government presently doesn't find any of these routes acceptable. So for the record, Minister, could he please highlight which of these accountability mechanisms does the UK Conservative government find acceptable?
Minister.
We respect the role and the independence of the ICJ, but our view is that Israel's actions in Gaza cannot be described as genocide or the points that he's been raising. And we're also remain clear that formal determination of genocide should be based upon the final judgment by a competent court.
Deirdre Black.
Mr. Speaker, could he just explain to me the rationale, this is something that's puzzled me for some time, behind advocating a humanitarian pause in the bombing, allowing medical aid, food, water, basic supplies into Gaza, and then presumably just permitting the killing to start up again? I mean, bombing civilians is a crime against humanity. Isn't it time for humanity to be reasserted here and for the immediate ceasefire that so many have called for to be started now?
Our position, the government's position, is that we need a pause, we need to get aid in, we need to get hostages out, and then work for the conditions for a lasting peace. And we have to recognise Hamas's role in getting to this point as well. And in those conditions, we need to remove Hamas's capacity to launch attacks against Israel and make sure that it's no longer in charge in Gaza.
That's Shah.
Can I just say thank you to my constituents who organised a gathering for the Palestinians in the north in my constituency this weekend for Eid gathering. which I attended, and there I met Palestinian Gaza health aid workers, and I heard lots of stories, and one of them, similar to the one which is a lady who had given birth to triplets, Nuzza Awad. Her babies should have weighed approximately 6 to 8 pounds each, but actually they weighed just 2 pounds each, and they haven't even developed their thighs because of malnutrition. Now, we know that 27 children have died so far, according to confirmed reports of malnutrition. We send the RAF jets in to support Israel when they are attacked, yet Israel does not heed the British government's warnings to get humanitarian aid in. So rightfully, people are asking, why is our government so weak when it concerns saving the lives of children?
Minister.
Some of the points you've made are absolutely tragic. It's heartrending to hear. But I just want to reiterate that we do want to see change. We're pushing for change, and we're taking the action to make sure there's more aid available. We just need to get those conditions now to enable the aid to come forward and get through to the people that need it on the ground in Gaza.
Clive Bethel.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't a bigger part of not standing. Will the minister say why it is when the Israeli government is not listening to him about aid getting in, that the government are still considering selling arms to Israel? It cannot be the case that we are pleading with them so much that the government then accepts that situation and continues to sell those arms.
We're working hard with the Israeli government on humanitarian issues which I've highlighted. Our export controls are in place and our approach remains unchanged. We do have to recognise that Israel does have the right to defend itself.
Keeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says the government recognises the importance of opening a northern crossing, but as my right honourable friend on the front bench said earlier, almost no aid is entering northern Gaza. The situation there is most desperate, in a desperate situation everywhere. Just what pressure, exactly what pressure is the government applying to ensure that routes to northern Gaza become operational as soon as possible and remain open?
Minister.
It's part of our ongoing diplomatic efforts with Israel and with our like-minded partners as well, who are committed to providing aid to get that in. And one of the key things that Israel's committed to is to that northern route. She makes that point very importantly, and that is one of those elements that we're continuing to urge Israel to stand up and commit to.
Ronnie Cowan.
F-35s are reducing Gaza to dust. During Pinochet's brutal rule in Chile, the workers of Rolls-Royce in East Kilbride refused to manufacture parts for the Chilean Air Force and were hailed as heroes. Why? Why will this UK government not follow that humanitarian example and stop exporting the parts for F-35s?
It's because we've got one of the most robust arms export regimes in the world. And as I've said, we need to recognise Israel's right to defend itself. He probably noticed what happened over the weekend with the attacks from Iran. These are not just important for what happens in Israel, vitally important that is, and for those involved in Gaza. This situation has ripple-out effects that destabilise in the region, have global implications as well.
Ian Byrne.
We were told a month ago that 1.1 million people face catastrophic levels of food insecurity in Gaza, and we're reduced to airdrops. The situation in northern Gaza is horrific, and it's a consequence of political choices. The World Food Programme has said this area is largely being cut off from aid and recorded the highest levels of catastrophic hunger in the world. 28 innocent children reported to have died of malnutrition and dehydration because of political choices. What meaningful, strong actions will the government take to ensure international law is upheld and to ensure that all Palestinians have a right to food?
Well, I think I've highlighted already the steps that we're taking. We also highlighted the commitments that Israel have made, and that's what we're asking Israel to do, is to step up to its commitments. It's made limited progress. We want to see much further progress to help those people on the ground.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to UNICEF, one child in Gaza is killed or injured on average every 10 minutes. Yesterday, Israeli occupying forces struck a playground in the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza, massacring at least 11 people and injuring many more. The Deputy Foreign Secretary has boasted about how proud his government is to be supplying Israel with arms, even while it commits such crimes against humanity, and has been found by the ICJ to be plausibly committing genocide against the Palestinian people. So can the Minister tell us categorically whether or not arms exported from Britain were used in the strike on the Benghazi refugee camp, and for that matter, whether the three British aid workers who were killed at the beginning of the month were killed by weapons manufactured in Britain?
As already highlighted, we have strong export controls, and the point that he makes, an important point, is we've asked Israel for a assessment and an investigation to take place, and an independent investigation to take place as to what happened in that situation.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to call for the immediate release of all hostages, for an immediate ceasefire, unhindered humanitarian aid, adherence to international law and accountability for any breaches, and an immediate international efforts for a two-state solution. But on aid and on international law, between the 6th and 12th of April, 41% of UN-coordinated missions to northern Gaza, where famine is underway and children are dying by the minute. And the obligation the Israeli authorities have to facilitate humanitarian war is a matter of law. It's not just about access, they have to get to where it's needed. I appreciate the difficulties the Minister has found himself in today, but I push again on why the government is so ineffective in getting support. We've had months upon months of saying that things are going to happen, and it never has. Why have they been so ineffective? And what are they going to do to make sure Israel adheres to our requests?
Minister.
I've highlighted that there has been limited progress, so that we have made some progress in our arguments, along with international partners with Israel. And now we're pressing for those other areas to be dealt with, including northern access. It's a vital priority, and we're pushing hard. And as I said, the Foreign Secretary is once again in the region this week to address these issues.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, Samantha Power of US Aid told Congress that they were witnessing famine in northern Gaza. Let's be honest here. To the wider global population, it appears Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, whether it be the supply into the country or intimidating and killing those workers who should be distributing it. So does he share the US assessment of the situation, and will he commit to supporting and restoring the funding of UNRWA?
Minister.
We remain concerned about the implications and the targeting of civilians. Too many have been killed, and we want Israel to make sure they take greater care to limit its operations to military targets. And as I said repeatedly, we await this report from Kelowna about the UNRWA situation, and then we can examine our response.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some 500 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza in the past 6 months. That's more than the total number of healthcare workers killed in all conflicts around the world in the previous 2 years. Does the Minister agree with Professor Nick Maynard, the British surgeon recently returned from Gaza, that healthcare workers are being deliberately targeted? And if so, why is the UK still supplying arms to Israel?
Minister.
I've addressed the point about arms, but I think it's important, the point he makes about protecting aid workers, and we believe they need to do much more to protect them, and that includes the guaranteed deconfliction of aid convoys and other humanitarian work to ensure that they can operate safely.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've heard the Minister repeatedly, in answer to questions, talk about pressure on Israel, encouraging Israel, a hope that Israel will respond.
When will they actually stand at the dispatch box and accept that for all the government's urging and encouraging, the situation's actually getting worse? So what is he going to say in concrete terms that the government is going to do now to get aid through, to make sure Israel lives up to the promise it makes and doesn't deliver on? And just in addition to that point, please don't give me an answer about the strength of our arms sales licence regime. How can it be morally right to provide arms to Israel being used in the killing of women and children and worsening the humanitarian crisis?
Minister.
As I've highlighted, we've trebled the amount of aid that we are putting into to support those people. We recognise as well that Israel is an occupying power, so we have to work with them to enable these things to happen. And the important thing is we are seeing limited progress, and as I've said, now we're pushing and pressing to see further progress in achieving the aims and the commitments that Israel has already set out.
Chiomura.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister, I hope, remembers Hind Rajab, the 6-year-old Palestinian girl who was trapped in a car with nothing but a mobile phone, her own cries for help, and a paramedic queue struggling to get to her. They and Hind were all killed that day. An IDF investigation concluded that its forces were not present near the vehicle within firing range. A subsequent Washington Post investigation disagrees. I raise that case, Madam Deputy Speaker, to remember Hind, but also because whenever the Israeli Defence Forces' actions result in increased civilian suffering or reduced humanitarian aid, as in the killing of aid workers, the government's response is to call on Israel to investigate itself. Is that really the only way to ensure accountability and reduce suffering?
On the specific point about aid workers, I did highlight that we also want to have an independent review as well. It's really important that they're protected. We need to understand the situation that happened on the ground. And she highlights, importantly, that we are also urging Israel to take greater care in limiting its operations and the impact it has on civilians.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, following the Iranian attacks of the weekend, we are one step away from the precipice of a regional war. And the comments of the Foreign Secretary this afternoon following his meetings with the Israeli government that he believes Israel is minded to act should worry us all. The British government rightly emphasised the need for de-escalation, but does it recognise that de-escalation must begin in Gaza?
Minister.
We need to de-escalate the whole situation and do everything we can to use our influence in that task. We've highlighted already what we're asking Israel to do and urging them to do as a humanitarian perspective in terms of their stated aims to carry out further military action in Rafah. And then there's the wider area as well. So we're working along with our partners in the region, around the world, to find ways to de-escalate the situation more widely. It is multifaceted, really complicated, but we're finding ways to bring that influence to bear because we do not want this to escalate any further.
Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every member of this House knows that it was that great conservative statesman who said that all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to stand by and do nothing. Today, the Minister has, and he's a good man, we know that. He must have been embarrassed. He stood there, he's wrung his hands, and he's told us that the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, has pleaded with the Israeli Prime Minister. When did the party of Edmund Burke become the party of complicity and appeasement?
Minister.
I'm not really sure that question deserves an answer, to be honest. Look, we've already highlighted cross-party these situations are complex. We're working incredibly hard with all our partners. I think that's recognised by the opposition front bench as well. Of course, it's challenging, but please don't lower the tone that way.
Alan Bryan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, so 1.1 million civilians in Gaza are currently at risk of starvation due to Israeli aid blockade. It's clearly a breach of humanitarian law and a breach of interim ICJ ruling. Now, the UK government actually tacitly recognises the breaches because they're trying to bypass the Israeli blockade using the Royal Navy. But the UK government's incoherent position is, rather than call out Israel, the Minister says they're urging and pleading Israel to change tack, while still selling arms to Israel and withholding funding to UNRWA. Now, the interim Kelowna report confirms UNRWA's neutrality. All other major donors, apart from the US, have restored funding. So what is it that's making the UK government wait in the final Kelowna report before restoring funding? Are they sitting intelligence that's somehow not available to all these other partners?
Minister.
We've made it clear that we want to see the full report and then we'll make a decision.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Between the 6th and the 12th of April, 41% of UN-coordinated aid missions to northern Gaza were impeded or denied access. The Israeli authorities' obligation to facilitate humanitarian support is not just about getting trucks in, it's about getting aid to where it's actually needed. That is a matter of international humanitarian law. So does he really think that less than 60% getting in is an acceptable rate? And does it really show the government's diplomatic efforts to be successful?
Minister.
We're seeing some success enabling and encouraging Israel to allow more of these trucks in. And as I said, it's limited progress, but it is progress. But clearly there's a lot more that needs to be done. And we're working with our partners to make sure we can do that.
Carol Monaghan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, testimony from an Israeli intelligence officer reveals that IDF soldiers were authorised to kill 20 uninvolved civilians for a single Hamas operative. Israel is flagrantly in breach of the principle of proportionality, and frankly, UK diplomacy is not working. So what will it take for the government to finally admit that Israel is breaching international humanitarian law and cease arms sales?
Minister.
We talked about this a number of times in this urgent question and our responses. And I'm just about to answer that particular question. Thanks for the encouragement there. We have grave concerns about the humanitarian access, but this is not sufficient to undermine our judgment that Israel is committed to complying with IHL in general.
James Murray.
Last week, Samantha Power, the Administrator of US Aid, told Congress that northern Gaza is now experiencing famine. Almost no aid is entering northern Gaza. So does the Minister agree this situation is intolerable and unacceptable? And what exactly is the government doing to make sure it changes urgently?
Minister.
Yeah, the situation is incredibly challenging, and one of the things, and I've said it already in answer to one of the earlier questions, is that in the commitments that Israel have made, one of them is about access in the north, and that's what we continue to urge Israel to now live up to its commitments so that aid can come in from the north, as well as more aid, more generally, into help those on the ground in Gaza.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Jim Henderson from Cornwall served in the Royal Marines for 7 years before working in Gaza. He and the aid convoy that was travelling from the north that he was supporting, they were following the right procedures and they remained on the correct route. It is understandable that the death of Jim and his fellow Brits should have seized our attention here at home and led to an investigation by the IDF. But the Secretary-General said a fortnight ago the death of all 196 aid workers killed in Gaza in the last 6 months should be subject to independent investigations. Does he agree?
Minister.
I've already highlighted how important it is that we urge Israel to do much more to protect aid workers. We want to make sure that there are guaranteed deconfliction of aid convoys, and we need to do other humanitarian work to help. And I want to pay tribute to those individuals who've done heroic work, including those that he highlighted. I think the honourable member will recognise that that individual he referred to is a constituent of my honourable friend, the member for Truro and Falmouth, who've been working, as I understand it, closely with their families, and I'm grateful to her for that.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister on a number of occasions today has said how complex the humanitarian situation is on the ground. UNRWA is the aid agency with most of the logistical and organisational network to deliver that. On Monday, the Prime Minister was asked a number of times around the interim report that he says the government has received. Will the Minister commit to publishing that in full, and the discussions that he says he's having with allies on what should happen next? Will those be published so that we know what it is that's holding back the UK from being the last country not to fund UNRWA?
The thing that's holding us back from signing off our approach is seeing the report. That's what we need to wait for. It's coming very, very soon, and we will be responding to that in full.
Alison Thewlis.
The Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has talked about the devastating destruction of Gaza's hospitals, including the dead bodies still being removed to the ruins of Al-Shifa. Will the United Kingdom fund the World Health Organization and other charities on the ground in Gaza to rebuild the shattered hospitals that have been destroyed under Israeli bombardment, and will he deliver the ceasefire necessary to allow this construction to happen, because that cannot happen while there is no construction materials going into Gaza?
She makes a characteristically thoughtful point, and an important one about reconstruction. I think our immediate approach now is about the pause, getting aid in. That's got to be the top priority right now. Then as we look forward, let's get those conditions in place to have a sustainable ceasefire, and as part of that we can work through how that reconstruction would take place.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you. As I said to the Prime Minister in his statement on Monday, the mother of James Kirby, one of the other aid workers who lost his life while trying to deliver aid through World Central Kitchen, is my constituent, and the family want answers, and I would really appreciate it if the Minister could tell the Foreign Secretary while he's in the region, you pass that message on from the family. They want answers. Yeah. But given what he said about guaranteed deconfliction, and what we've heard from my honourable friend here about the attacks on care workers, as well as the attacks on people trying to deliver food aid, can he explain to me what these pleas for guaranteed deconfliction actually mean? Because I just don't see that it's working.
Yeah. Minister.
Well, it's. I'd also just like to pay tribute, as she has, to James Kirby, and our thoughts are clearly and our prayers are with his family. The work that we're doing to raise this point with Israel is important, and we want to find ways to make sure that we deconflict these aid convoys. I think Israel has recognised that there are challenges there. They're going to be carrying out their own report, and there needs to be this further independent review that can help find ways to make sure that this deconfliction can be meaningful and strong.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Minister very much for his response to all the questions. It's quite clear the Minister is a Minister with compassion, and he wants to answer in the best way, and we thank him for that. I had occasion last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be in Israel. I had occasion to visit some of the kibbutz where innocent Jewish people were murdered. I had occasion to visit the Nova musical festival where over 1,000 young people were murdered as well. And I had occasion to meet some of the families. All of that as a result of Hamas terrorism upon the Israeli people. The reason why we have got a humanitarian crisis in Gaza is because of Hamas. So can the Minister confirm what discussions have taken place to open wider channels to allow medical aid in and to allow ill people to come out to have medical interventions free from harassment and intervention from Hamas?
I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for his comments, and I regard him as a very good friend. He's right to highlight the role in Hamas and what they've done to get to this situation, and now we are working collectively to figure out how we can best address these situations. Medical supplies are key. We will be providing those. We're providing support in terms of shelter. We've been helping with airdrops. We know there's more that needs to be done. That's clear across the House. There's frustration in this task, and I'm grateful to all the colleagues here across the House for, on most of the occasions, measured comments, and I understand their concerns. I'm also pleased that people haven't resorted to cheap party politics here. These are incredibly difficult challenges, and I'm very grateful for the questions and the challenge that's being provided. It's constructive. We'll use that to help make the case to those on the ground that need to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank the Minister. That concludes proceedings on the urgent question. Points of order come after statements, after urgent questions and statements, unless it's directly related to the statement, the UQ we've just had. It is a point of order, Chairman McCrory.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I apologise for not giving you forward notice of my point of order, but it is something that has just occurred. The member for Tiverton and Honiton just referred to the death of one of my constituents, which has just recently happened in relation to this urgent question, without notifying me. And the reason I raise this today, Madam Deputy Speaker, is this is an incredibly sensitive time, and I have connected with the family through the Foreign Office and Development Consular Service, which is the right and proper thing to do, and I am nervous that his name is being taken to score points across the chamber when it is completely inappropriate to do so. And I wonder if you could advise me how we can avoid this in the future.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order. I noted the exchanges to which she refers, and it did occur to me as the exchanges were taking place that the Honourable Member for Tiverton and Honiton should have thought twice before mentioning the name in very, very, very sensitive, sad, indeed tragic circumstances of the constituent of another Member of Parliament. I wonder if he would like to apologise.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. My point of order is that I'd firstly like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for her work on behalf of her constituents. I think that it is the duty of everybody in this chamber to work with sensitive casework as close as we can, and clearly she has done that. I should add that I used my point about an individual who has unfortunately suffered a terrible, awful circumstance, and I think draws a parallel to the 196 aid workers who've been killed in this awful, terrible war.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for responding, and we must be very careful because this is as sensitive as a subject possibly can be, and there are bereaved people who will be watching our proceedings. My heart goes out to them, and I'm sure the whole House feels like that. But I understand the Honourable Lady's point, and I think the Honourable Gentleman has said that he will be more careful in future. Thank you. We now proceed to the next urgent question. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office if he will make a statement on the deportation of Afghan refugees from Pakistan to Afghanistan.
Minister Trevelyan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK has a long-standing and close relationship with Pakistan. We engage regularly with the government of Pakistan to advance key priorities and interests, including on human rights and adherence to international law. We are closely monitoring Pakistan's policy on the deportation of Afghanistan's citizens from Pakistan, and we are working with the UNHCR and with IOM to ensure that Pakistan adheres to its international human rights obligations with respect to those affected. We understand that the recently elected government of Pakistan intends to resume their programme of deportations from mid-April following a winter pause, although this has not yet been formally announced. And whilst we respect Pakistan's sovereign right to control its borders, the UK, alongside the international and donor community, are urging Pakistan to do so in accordance with their international obligations. The UK has committed £18.5 million to the International Organisation for Migration, IOM, in Afghanistan to support vulnerable, undocumented returnees from Pakistan and Iran. As part of this work, we have been engaging closely with the government of Pakistan on these measures, and they have assured us of their support in relation to preventing the deportation of Afghans eligible for resettlement in the UK under Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy, ARAP, or Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, the ACRS scheme. Since the formation of the new Pakistani cabinet, the Foreign Secretary and the British High Commissioner have received assurances from Foreign Minister Dar during discussions on the 25th and the 28th of March, respectively, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would support our relocations work. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we continue to work closely with the UNHCR and IOM to ensure that all Afghans who have been found eligible, including eligible family members, for resettlement in the UK under the ARAP and ACRS schemes have been provided with the necessary documentation to verify this and to prevent their deportation.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Saying that Afghanistan is not a safe place is something of an understatement. Almost two-thirds of the Afghan population were in need of humanitarian aid by the end of last year. And in the words of the United Nations High Commissioner, human rights are in a state of collapse. The restriction on women and girls amount to nothing less than a gender apartheid. Afghanistan is not a safe place for anyone, but is particularly not safe for the Afghan who worked along Western forces and diplomatic efforts, for civil society advocates, for women who formerly held high-profile political or legal roles, for members of the LGBTQ community, and the many, many others who were forced to flee when the Taliban took control. And many of those who fled to Pakistan are desperately awaiting resettlement to safe countries, including the UK. And yesterday, reports suggest that Pakistan has started that deportation of Afghans back to Afghanistan. And resettlement, the hope of safety and being reunited with families, is now at risk of being completely lost. And for some of those waiting to come here, the routes are open, but the process is achingly slow. Many await family reunion, which was promised to start this spring, whilst others believe that they will be eligible to apply to come to safety in the UK under ACRS Route 3 Pathway 2, as yet unopened, almost 3 years after the fall of Kabul. I urge the Minister's Home Office colleagues to act in this regard. Pakistan's decision to deport the migrants they deem to be illegal is deeply worrying. In the first round of deportations in October last year, which was the subject of an urgent question by a Mobile member for Glasgow Central, there were news reports of Afghans eligible for resettlement here being arrested during immigration enforcement. There is every reason to believe that this will happen again. And indeed, this round, Madam Deputy Speaker, puts even more people at risk. Afghans in Pakistan are meant to hold a Pakistan-issued Afghan citizen card. However, there are reports of long delays for applications being processed, leaving people undocumented through no fault of their own. And more concerningly, it has been reported that the latest round of deportations will even include those carrying cards. And effectively, this puts at risk every Afghan in Pakistan, no matter their reason for being there. The UK has a responsibility here, not just to those Afghans who we promised safety to, but in relation to the region as a whole. We can all understand the desire to flee from persecution, but we also understand the difficulties placed on support systems in Pakistan in response to those fleeing reaching their borders. If we want to show the UK as a global power and a global force for good, then we must act. So I ask the Minister what steps the Department is taking to ensure that all individuals eligible for resettlement or reunification in the UK are able to register themselves as being legally in Pakistan, what steps the Department is taking to prevent deportations of Afghans in Pakistan if they are likely to be eligible to settle in the UK, what steps they are taking with foreign allies to encourage Pakistan to halt these repatriations, and finally what steps the UK can take to assist Pakistan in supporting that refugee population. People are being sent back to Afghanistan now, and all the dangers that entails. We must act. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's good to have the opportunity to discuss this issue. The Honourable Lady raises an important question, but I can repeat the assurances that we have now had from this newly elected Pakistani government. They have repeated assurances that we had from the previous government that all Afghans who are eligible for our UK resettlement schemes, various, will be exempt from deportation. We have had 2 instances of temporary detentions where the British High Commission has intervened to secure those, and that has gone well. And since November, all those eligible Afghans eligible for resettlement in the UK are provided with identification, a letter by the British High Commission, and that is being considered acceptable by the Government of Pakistan. None of those have been detained or deported as a result of that letter, which is that commitment from us through the High Commission to assure them that our commitment to those eligible Afghans to come to the UK are under our umbrella of protection.
James Heapy.
Gosh, Madam Speaker, 5 years since my last question, but the first time ever being called first. Madam Speaker, it seems curious that we're having a question on the sovereign decision of another government, and whilst the Honourable Lady wants to challenge the front bench on our representations to that government, I thought it important to reflect that throughout my time owning the Arab scheme, at least the MOD, the Pakistan government was extraordinarily supportive of everything we asked them. So would the Right Honourable Lady join me in paying tribute to both our High Commissioner and her brilliant team at post in Islamabad, but also in making clear our continued gratitude to the government of Pakistan for the incredible flexibility they show in facilitating both Arab and ACRS?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to be able to discuss this issue in a new way with my right honourable friend. We've been working closely on these issues within government, and his commitment to making sure that those eligible for these schemes have been able to come to the UK has been without exception absolutely incredible. And just to add to that, since October of last year, we've been able to complete 24 charter flights and relocated over 5,500 individuals under the ongoing Arab scheme. And I absolutely pay tribute to the incredible, tireless efforts of our British High Commissioner Jane Marriott and her wonderful team in Islamabad, who continue to work day in, day out with the government of Pakistan, their officials and their military, who help us to ensure that we can bring those Afghans safely to the UK in due course.
Shadow Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for North East Fife for bringing forward this urgent question and for her work across the House on women particularly suffering in these circumstances. And despite Afghanistan no longer occupying the headlines, the situation for the country is stark, and that we know across the House. Women in particular living under a gender apartheid, and the men and women who fought bravely for a better Afghanistan alongside British armed services, often targeted and killed by the Taliban, as confirmed by the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. Labour's always been clear that we owe many Afghans a debt of gratitude for supporting British aims in Afghanistan. Now, she mentioned the figure 5,500, but could she say how many she estimates now require protection so that they're not repatriated back across the border? And would she answer three other brief questions for the information of the House? Firstly, could she detail the discussion she's had with the Pakistani government to halt or at least limit the returns to Afghanistan? What steps she's taking to belatedly bring to safety those at-risk Afghans, particularly former members of the Afghan security force, particularly now that certain members are no longer in the government and maybe not there to make the case for these vulnerable individuals? What steps are being taken to commit to a strategy across the board to support women and girls in Afghanistan, to give them hope that they have not been forgotten, and to recognise the important work done by Her Noble Baroness Kennedy and others on gender apartheid in these Houses of Parliament? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the Honourable Lady highlights, my right honourable friend has been a stalwart in making sure that those who are eligible for Arab, and indeed from the wider cohort, the ACRS schemes, have been moving forward. As I say, we have an agreement, and the government of Pakistan, the new government, are supporting it, that where we indicate from the High Commission that these are people who are eligible for the scheme, they are comfortable that we are therefore going to bring them across. And as I say, that number since October illustrates that continuing repatriation of these people across here. So those discussions are daily between the High Commission and various parts of the government of Pakistan as required to ensure and make progress on all of those issues. And we continue to bring those across. The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. My right honourable friend has been an absolute champion for making sure that those are eligible go through the system. I can reassure her that my other right honourable friend, who has now taken over that brief in the Ministry of Defence, will, I know, continue to ensure that as the programme rolls out, it goes at the pace and indeed the assurance that those who are in Pakistan looking to come to the UK for safety are expecting.
Sir Oliver Heald.
As honourable friend knows, there are people who, in the process of making their way to Pakistan from Afghanistan, became undocumented, but who nonetheless are entitled to resettlement here, either because they helped us in our military or because of their work in the legal system. And would she agree with me? It is important, if possible, for the Pakistani government to continue to show enough flexibility so that while somebody is showing that they are entitled to come here and that becomes documented, that during that process they're protected.
Thank you. Honourable friend is absolutely right. The importance of making sure that all those who are eligible, who have applied and are being processed or have been processed through the scheme, who may still be in Pakistan and not yet made it here to the UK, they have this support literally controlled by the team at the High Commission, and they have these letters of support so that the government of Pakistan knows that they are within our ARAP eligible umbrella, and that will continue to be the case until such time as we've been able to bring them all to the UK.
SNP spokesman Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I think it's only right and proper that the member for North East Fife who's bringing this urgent question today, so congratulations to them. And I've noted in a reference from the recent joint committee on the human rights, I note that the learned member for Edinburgh South West, who's the chair, is actually in their place. The committee report highlights that the Prime Minister of Pakistan has referenced the Rwanda scheme as their justification for actually deporting Afghans back into the hands of the Taliban. I wonder if the Minister agrees that the Afghans who fought with British forces, the men and women who fought with British forces, and were not brought out of safety with Operation Pitting, yet managed to flee the Taliban and use small boats to cross the channel to get to the UK, should not be sent to Rwanda, or as a message from the present British government to our allies, we'll use you, we'll drop you when we've had our way with you.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as we have discussed, of course, the question of Rwanda a lot in recent weeks. We consider, as does the international community, Rwanda is a safe country. I don't think it's comparable in that sense to Afghanistan, but importantly, as I say, for all those who have, as the Honourable Gentleman highlights, worked alongside British forces and who have applied and are eligible for ARAP, or indeed those not in the military space but more widely applied and are eligible for the ACRS scheme, we are continuing to ensure that they are able to have that protection through the letter from the High Commission in Pakistan whilst they're there, whilst we look to bring them to the UK in due course, and that will continue to be the case until that programme is completed.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Of the estimated 1.7 million refugees on the border, many of those are going to be members of Christians or other minority religious sects. What safeguards is the UK government putting in place or having conversations with the Pakistan government to make sure those Christians are not returned to Afghanistan where they will be persecuted and that faith can shine through?
Minister.
Honourable friend raises an important point, and one that is important to raise, and as I said in my statement earlier, we will continue always to remind the new government of Pakistan, as we had the previous one, of their international obligations around some of these incredibly difficult issues, and that's a conversation, as I say, because we have a very good relationship with the government of Pakistan that we continue to do daily.
Naz Shah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm a really proud foster parent to an Afghan refugee who came over, and I'm actually a grandmother by that standard now. So I am really grateful for the urgent question, and I am really concerned about those that have been forcibly taken out of Pakistan, and particularly the reports about those that were actually born in Pakistan. But it does smack me of a bit of a sick joke, if you like, if that on one hand we're talking about bringing Afghan refugees here, but on the other hand, tonight, this government will be voting down the Noble Lord Brown's amendment for Afghans who actually supported us, our British armed forces, that could be packed off to Rwanda. So my question is really simple. How do we show we show a moral stance on the issue today when the government will be voting down that amendment for Afghans who are at risk?
Minister.
Madam Secretary, first of all, I think how lovely to hear of that personal commitment to refugee from the honourable member's family. I think so many stories like that are so important. It's lovely to hear them brought here, because I think to champion and show that the commitment is much more than just words is lovely to hear, and congratulations on becoming, as it were, a granny. It's a lovely story to share. I think really importantly, and the Honourable Lady raises the question of those who worked and served alongside our armed forces or in other areas. Those two schemes, incredibly generous schemes, Arab and ACRS, are there precisely to be able to provide the opportunity for those who wish to apply, who are eligible, to come and have safe harbour in the UK. And that's a scheme, particularly Arab, which will continue for as long as is needed, and we encourage those who perhaps haven't, though the numbers suggest that very large numbers have already applied to do so, and it is a long-standing, as I say, and very generous scheme which we will continue to do. And week in, week out, we are able to bring these incredibly brave people who served and supported our armed forces to the UK.
Mark Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And my Afghan diaspora in Bolton takes this matter very seriously under the leadership of Dr. Aziz, who I should also note is opening a new medical centre next week in Bolton. What we'd like to ask is what discussions has government had with the Pakistani High Commissioner to the UK to make sure that those who are eligible won't be adversely affected by this 15th of April deadline that the Pakistani government is now working to deport Afghans from the country.
Minister.
The honourable member raised an important point, and it's good to hear that a new medical centre is opening, which will provide, I'm sure, for the whole community important services. As I say, both our British High Commissioner in Islamabad and indeed the conversations that we have with senior officials here and the Pakistani High Commissioner based in London continue day in, day out. It's a very close relationship. That commitment that we have in provision of a letter of support for those who are in Pakistan waiting to come to the UK because they have been found eligible for one of the two schemes is one that is respected, and the new government of Pakistan have indicated as the other one did.
Joanna Cherry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as my honourable friend, the member for Western Bartonshire, has already mentioned, in our report on the Rwanda Bill, the Joint Committee on Human Rights warned that other nations might be influenced by the way in which the United Kingdom treats its international law obligations. This was earlier this year, and we noted that at that stage, the Prime Minister of Pakistan had already referred to the UK government's Rwandan policy in defence of his decision to deport Afghan refugees. Now, I would suggest to the Minister this is actually quite a serious matter. And does she appreciate that while the Pakistani policy might not be identical to the British government's Rwanda policy, the fact that the British government has been prepared to set to one side its international treaty obligations in respect of refugees and asylum seekers acts as an encouragement to other countries who wish to do the same?
Minister.
Madam Deputy, as I say, I would not compare what we consider Rwanda a safe country for those who would be ineligible for asylum here to be compared to Afghanistan. But really importantly, those Afghan refugees who are eligible to come under one of our two incredibly generous, very broad schemes have that layer of protection until such time as they get here through the High Commission and that relationship that we have with the government of Pakistan, who are very clear that they would not look to deport any of those eligible Afghan refugees to come to the UK.
Gary Sambrook.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can my right honourable friend the Minister explain the assessment which has been made of the adequacy of the humanitarian assistance available to those at the Pakistan and Afghanistan border?
Minister.
The honourable member raises an important point, and I think just to highlight that in terms of our UK commitment, we obviously continue to be one of the largest donors to Afghanistan on a number of humanitarian areas, 113 million in aid last year. And whilst not wishing to speak out of turn because the Development Minister isn't here, he's been in Paris working on an Ethiopian peace package, we hope to be able to invest something near £150 million in the coming financial year in support of those humanitarian challenges for Afghanistan.
Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's possible, indeed likely, that some of the Afghans in Pakistan are those whose ARAP application is currently being reassessed by the MOD. The outgoing Minister for the Armed Forces, and we heard from him just a moment ago, updated the House on this just recently, and I'm due a response to a written question on the progress of this from the Ministry of Defence today. Now, it's good to see the Minister from the Ministry of Defence sat with the Minister, but given the urgency of this matter, can I ask her to give an assurance that her department is working very closely with his department to ensure that where there are potential ARAP-entitled people in Pakistan, their applications are being reassessed as quickly as possible? Thank you.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman raises an important point, and I am comfortable in committing to him that he will receive the reply he hopes to have by the close of play, and that he's absolutely right. We are, the FCDO and the MOD are working hand in glove. The teams are incredibly well joined up, and they are, I mean, to give them a gentle shout out, because they work tirelessly to make sure that everyone's application is properly scrutinised. And as I say, these schemes are very generous, and we will continue to run them until such time we will be able to bring all of those eligible back to the UK for safety.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is absolutely ludicrous that after 3 years since the fall of Afghanistan, that we are still talking about people that the UK government has left behind. Absolutely appalling and incompetent that those that supported UK ambitions in Afghanistan have been so woefully neglected.
Hear, hear.
Can she tell me exactly how many people exactly are waiting for the UK government to get their act together and process their ACRS and their ARAP applications?
Hear, hear, hear.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I say, these are broad and generous schemes, and I can update the House today, because these are the figures I have in front of me, that since October of last year we have been able to complete 24 charter flights and relocated over 5,500 individuals, and we will continue to work on that, and our High Commissioner and her team in Islamabad and the teams here through the Ministry of Defence, the teams who work from the Ministry of Housing, an incredible team of officials working together to make sure that we bring all those who are eligible back to the UK.
Debbie Abrams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While I acknowledge the role Pakistan has played in hosting Afghans after the pitting exercise, we need to recognise that many of the people that are being returned from Pakistan will be at significant risk. On top of that, many Afghans were incorrectly advised about which scheme to apply for, and as a consequence may not even be in the process. So in addition to those that have started the process, there will be another cohort who haven't started it because of the poor advice before. So given that AICS isn't even opened now, there is no phase 4 opened at this moment, what numbers of people are expected? I've got a constituent, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is really important. What numbers is the Minister expecting aren't on the process and need to be accommodated?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I say, the ARAP programme is a very generous one, and it remains open, and and with ACRS, obviously the first part has been running, and we will continue to run these schemes as we need to. But so the Honourable Lady is very welcome to write to me if she says she has a very specific constituent connection that she wishes to raise. She's very welcome to write to me, and I'm happy to look at that. But the schemes continue to work, and our teams are working day in, day out to make sure that those who are eligible are able to get to the UK.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've raised before about the special forces, and who may be stuck now in Pakistan, but also the matter of those who are working in local government, who may have been magistrates and others. Family members, Afghan family members in my constituency, suggest that this could have long-term reputational damage on the UK in terms of how this has been handled. What's her assessment?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the honourable gentleman highlights the fact that the review of further potential eligible applicants is ongoing by the Ministry of Defence, and as decisions on eligibility are determined, they will of course have the support of those who are already in the scheme and eligible to come to the UK. And I'm very proud of what is a very broad and generous scheme, and it will continue to run for some time, I have no doubt, whilst we bring many of these refugees to the UK.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister, as always, for her responses. What steps are government going to take to not only provide safe passage and route for Afghan allies to reach the UK, but also to provide them with safe legal status? I give the case, Madam Deputy Speaker, of one of my constituents who served in Afghanistan in the army. Alongside of him served an Afghani. That Afghani had to leave with his family Afghanistan and flee to Pakistan. I met him in Pakistan 2.5 or almost 3 years ago. The point I want to make is, if we get that gentleman and his family, his wife and his 4 children, to Strangford constituency, we'll get him a job, we'll get him a house, we'll make sure that his children are educated. What we need, Minister, is a visa to ensure that he gets here. And if you can do that, if you can process his application, if the Minister can process his application correctly, then the good people of Strangford will do the rest.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I think and I'm sure you have absolute confidence that the communities of Strangford will wrap their arms around those refugees that come to the UK. And if there is a particular issue, the Honourable is very welcome to write to me, but I know that the British High Commission in Islamabad are working constantly with those there who are eligible to do that paperwork, which is quite extensive, and there are a lot of them. But if there is a particular case and he'd like to raise it with me, I'd be very happy to discuss it.
Thank you. That concludes proceedings on the urgent question, and so we move to the 10-minute rule motion. Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the maximum noise levels of fireworks which may be sold to the public and for connected purposes. My bill aims to tackle the antisocial use of fireworks and means that fireworks available to the general public no longer emit sound levels that are equivalent to a pneumatic drill or a chainsaw, but would be capped at sound levels equivalent to an alarm clock or a hairdryer. Whilst fireworks can be a great source of entertainment, currently they also cause misery for many people and their pets right across this country. This bill would stop shops from selling loud fireworks to the general public, tackling this widespread problem. In my own constituency of Bradford South, the misuse of fireworks is a 24/7, round-the-clock blight and causes unacceptable stress and anxiety to both people and their pets. I would take this opportunity to also highlight my petition on this subject, which is currently live on my website, which calls for a reduction in the decibel limit of fireworks and has already been signed by so many of my constituents. Because time and time again, people in Bradford South tell me that their family life is disrupted as their children and their pets are being rudely awakened by the excessive noise of fireworks after 11 p.m, and in some cases this happens every single night. Now, letting off fireworks on a non-designated day after 11 p.m. is of course illegal. But as members right across this House will know, the policing and enforcement of current fireworks legislation, to put it mildly, is a challenge. But we can stop this antisocial behaviour involving fireworks by preventing people from buying excessively noisy fireworks from shops in the first place. This bill has the power to protect people from noise disturbance without impacting the enjoyment of those who want to use fireworks. I would emphasise here that professionals can still continue to use fireworks which exceed the 90 decibel limit, and so organised public displays will not be affected. And I'm certainly not seeking to stop people from enjoying fireworks responsibly. And of course, the issue of antisocial use of fireworks is not just a Bradford problem, it's a nationwide problem. The Petitions Committee noted in 2019 that thousands of people across the country had raised the issue of antisocial behaviour associated with fireworks. The committee recognised that many people felt current laws were unenforceable and that complaints were not acted on. Local authority and police witnesses confirmed that the current legislation is challenging to enforce. Fireworks are regulated in England according to the Fireworks Act of 2003, introduced by my predecessor, and the Pyrotechnic Articles Regulation 2015 and the Explosives Regulations 2014. And as it stands, there are 4 categories of fireworks. Whilst Category 4 fireworks present a high hazard risk and can only be supplied to those with the specialist knowledge, members of the public can purchase Cat 1, 2 and 3 fireworks. Cat 3 fireworks present a low to medium hazard risk and are intended for outdoor use. In the current legislation, the maximum noise level of fireworks which can be bought in shops must not exceed 120 decibels, as measured by an appropriate method at the determined safety distance. But this legislation is simply out of date and ineffective. With the public, police and local authorities complaining of the inadequacy of the law, it's time to change the law, stop the noise and reduce the maximum decibel limit of publicly available fireworks. Because the dangerous and antisocial use of noisy fireworks can have a serious effect on people's health and cause distress. One constituent described to me how the fireworks cause her windows and her window panes to shake 4 times a week, week after week. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are talking about persistent noise nuisance, which people are unable to plan for, causing severe disturbances to both their pets and to people's everyday lives. And the antisocial use of fireworks can be really distressing for those with health conditions and disabilities. Giving evidence to a parliamentary committee, parents spoke of their experiences caring for their children. One parent said, "Our son has severe complex needs, including epilepsy, which can cause him to stop breathing. The public are able to set fireworks off at any time. We cannot guarantee how loud they're going to be. My son screams, has a seizure and has to be administered oxygen." One of my constituents in Bradford has spoken to me about the impact on people with anxiety, including a mother. Another spoke of local ex-servicemen suffering from PTSD, who are constantly affected by loud explosive fireworks. As one constituent told me, it's a disgrace that animals and humans have to suffer like this, and this issue must be dealt with. The very first step must be to introduce new limitations on the noise levels of publicly available fireworks. The proposal to limit the noise levels of fireworks to 90 decibels or less is supported by leading animal charities, with the RSPCA endorsing my bill, saying that we believe by introducing measures like this we can better prioritise the safety and well-being of animals and vulnerable people. We urge parliamentarians across the House to work with Judith on these welcome proposals. The current decibel limit of 120 was based on studies into the effects of noise on people rather than on animals. Loud and high-pitched noises can adversely affect a large proportion of animals, whose hearing is often much more sensitive and acute than humans. According to the RSPCA, around 2/3 of animals are distressed by at-home firework displays. One of my constituents described the harmful impact of fireworks on her pet, saying, "My dog shakes at the sound of fireworks. When we try to cuddle and calm her down, nothing works. I've even been to the door shouting, 'Please stop.'" And this shows the desperation of animal lovers. Another one told me, "My brother's dog died recently of a suspected heart attack as he lay quivering under his bed, terrified of fireworks." And so it's absolutely vital that animals and pets are considered alongside human needs. This bill would make the necessary alterations to the legislation, ensuring that the upper decibel limit of publicly available fireworks is set at 90 decibels. This is a modest but necessary change to the law as it exists, but it would be life-changing for so many people and animals right across this country. This is a bill for those who fear the excessive noise of fireworks. a bill for people whose pets are left terrified by the noise of fireworks, a bill that would end the broken sleep of children, a bill for those who want to end the misery that these noisy fireworks bring. It is time that this House acts to defend people across this country from the harmful impact of the illegal use of noisy fireworks. This bill tackles the issue in a practical and workable way. The bill will take pressures off overstretched and under-resourced police and law enforcement agencies by eliminating the availability of noisy fireworks in the first place. Importantly, this bill also allows for people to still enjoy fireworks, just in a way that means that other people and animals won't be disturbed. It aims to end the misery caused to people and their pets, legal and antisocial use of fireworks at all hours of the day and night, day in, day out, week after week. It puts an end to this relentless bombardment because people should not have to put up with this, and this bill provides this place with the opportunity to act.
Thank you. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Kirsten Oswald, Marco Longi, Mr Clive Betts, Peter Dowd, Rachel Maskell, Naz Shah, Imran Hussain and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Judith Cummins.
Fireworks, noise limits bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 26th of April, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Friday the 26th of April. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Safety of Rwanda, Asylum and Immigration Bill, consideration of Lord's message. Now.
Before we move to consideration of the Lord's message, I can confirm that nothing in the Lord's message engages Commons financial privilege. We will begin with the government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1D, with which we will consider the other government motions as listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1D. Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, here we are again. Thank you very much indeed, and I beg to move that this House disagrees with the Lords in their amendments. Madam Deputy Speaker, you were in the chair on the last occasion, and this House has now voted several times, not to mention the strong endorsement of the bill at second and third readings. We need to bring this process to a conclusion, to get the bill onto the statute book, and to get the flights off the ground as soon as possible. Turning to the first amendment, the Lord's Amendment in New Amendment 1D has added in a number of Acts of Parliament and is simply not necessary. 3 lines, 3 acts have been added. So we should have due regard for the Children Act, the Human Rights Act, the Modern Slavery Act. Why stop there? Why not the Equality Act? Why not the Data Protection Act? Why not any other act? Why not have the whole statute book listed out there on the face of the document? The answer is because it is not necessary. The treaty, the bill and the evidence together demonstrates that Rwanda is safe for relocated individuals, that the government's approach is tough but fair, that it's lawful, it has justification and it seeks to uphold our international obligations. As I've set out in our earlier debates, the government respects the decision of the Supreme Court, and it's precisely to address those concerns of the Supreme Court that this government has brought forward the treaty with the Republic of Rwanda, as well as preparing an evidence pack on what has changed and how those concerns are being addressed. The government is now... Of course I'll give way to somebody.
I was struck listening to Lord Hope's amendment earlier today, that how reasonable it seemed setting up an independent body to assert what the Minister is saying, that Rwanda is a safe place. What could possibly be wrong with that?
Well, I'll turn to that amendment in a few minutes, but there already is an independent body. It's the Monitoring Committee, it's there, it's part of the treaty. That's not this amendment that I'm speaking to. I hope to allay some of her concerns, and I hope to see her in the division lobby in a few minutes. The short answer to her question is there already is an independent body. It's the Monitoring Committee, and hopefully she'll hear that in a few minutes' time, but I'm grateful to her for her intervention, because what the government is now doing is inviting Parliament, having considered the lengthy and extensive exchanges, Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the passage of this bill, to agree with our assessment that the Supreme Court's concerns have indeed been properly addressed, and to enact the measures in this bill accordingly. Of course I give way.
Thank the Minister for we as a party will, with the exception of one of the amendments, probably indeed we will support the party tonight. I asked a question of the Minister in a previous engagement in relation to the freedom of religious belief. Because we have freedom of religious belief here in the United Kingdom, and there has been some disquiet expressed to me in my position as chair of the APPG for freedom of religious belief about the same freedom in Rwanda, and because of that, and because people have come back to me and asked me the same question, can I again ask the Minister very sincerely and very graciously to answer that question? Is there the same freedom of religious belief in Rwanda that we have in the United Kingdom? Thank you.
Well, I don't think I can tell the honourable gentleman that any system, any two countries' systems are the same. I can repeat the point that I've made before, that it is there within the Constitution. Those freedoms are there within the Constitution of Rwanda. And I'll get to him the precise wording, because he has asked me that question before, and I've read out the precise wording to him before, but I will endeavour to do so again before the end of this debate. Of course I give way.
Very grateful to the Minister. Many people share the government's ambition to stop the boats. Is it the case that these Lords' amendments would muddle the legislation in a way which would leave us open once again to unnecessary court challenge? And can you reassure us that the bill unamended would do the job?
I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend. I know he's taken a close interest since the outset of this bill, and he's right. The amendments fall into two categories: those that are simply unnecessary and those that are worse than unnecessary. They're wrecking amendments. They're deliberately put in order to prevent the very things that the bill was designed to do, namely to stop the boats and to get the planes off the ground. But as my honourable friend, the member for Stone, reminds us, the approach that's adopted in this bill, and he did comment that I've been repeating myself from time to time. My honourable friend has been accusing me of repeating myself, heaven forfend, but he is right, because the approach taken is justified as a matter of parliamentary sovereignty. It is justified in terms of constitutional propriety. Indeed, my right honourable learned friend has even said it's not unprecedented, and he's right about that. And it is in relation to our international obligations as well. May I turn to... Of course.
Well, may I reciprocate his comment? Because insofar as I may have suggested, rather infelicitously, that my honourable friend was repeating himself, I have to confess that I too have repeated myself. And I've done so for I have done so for extremely good reasons, because I believe that the amendment which I put forward, which I won't go into now, which got a huge amount of support in the House, but was not accepted by the government at the time, still presents a serious question which has to be answered. And that is, to go back to what my old friend, the member for Wokingham, mentioned just now, there is going to come a time when this bill goes through, hopefully in the immediate future, at which the matter will then become a bill turned into an act by royal assent. At that very moment, a claim is going to come straight in from Matrix Chambers or from one of the other Doughty Chambers or whoever, as sure as anything, for claimants. And the question is then going to be, what is the Supreme Court going to do about this? And that is the subject on which I return over and over again. When we said, as I think my honourable friend knows only too well, that we were concerned that the bill would not work. It wasn't that we didn't want it to work, it's exactly the opposite. We want it to work, and I'm concerned still at this moment in time, given the fact that the opposition is still going on about the issue of international law, that we are going to need to be sure that the words as used are clear and unambiguous in such a manner that the court will rule in favour of the government. If not, it's all over.
Once again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. He does have a tendency from time to time to repeat himself. He's admitted that, but he's right to do so, and he's mentioned in the past paragraph 144 of the Supreme Court's judgment. He's absolutely right, and I can cite it in full. In any event, the principle of legality does not permit a court to disregard an unambiguous expression of Parliament's intention such as that with which we are concerned in the present case. And that has been, may I say, our joint endeavour to ensure that this legislation is clear and unambiguous. Turning now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the implementation of the treaty. On the issue of implementation, let me reiterate that Clause 9 of the bill clearly sets out that the bill provisions come into force when the treaty enters into force, and that the treaty enters into force when the parties have completed their internal procedures. We will only ratify the treaty once again with Rwanda when all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. And the Monitoring Committee, and I refer to our previous exchange, the Monitoring Committee will undertake daily monitoring of the partnership for at least the first 3 months. So this is daily monitoring for at least the first 3 months to ensure rapid identification of and response to any issues. This is the enhanced phase, and it will ensure that comprehensive monitoring and reporting takes place in real time. Let me give way first across the chamber, and then of course I'll give way to my honourable learned friend.
Very grateful. And will the Minister ensure that the report is laid before Parliament so that we can review that?
Well, the Monitoring Committee's work is independent. I'm going to develop my points in future. Commitments have already been made that there will be an update in Parliament. That was one of the amendments in lieu that was tabled and passed on the last occasion that we debated these things. But here and now and today, it is the right thing to do to push back on all of these amendments which are either unnecessary or wrecking. I give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable learned friend for giving way, and I very much appreciate the tone and manner in which he is approaching this difficult issue. But can you just help me in one matter? I understand his point that there are some amendments which might have the effect of delaying the bill or might give rise to challenges and delay the policy objective. But I'm troubled about why that should be thought to apply to Lord's Amendment 3, which is the one proposed by the noble Lord Hope of Craighead, very distinguished jurist, and proposing very moderate and unpartisan terms, because the rub of what will happen going forward is perhaps whether or not Rwanda is safe. Now, Parliament can legislate as a matter of sovereignty to say it is, of course, but for it to be effective, we do have to deal with the fact that we have chosen to make ourselves judges of fact, but facts may change. And given that we have put in place the mechanism with the Monitoring Committee and the enhanced arrangements, all to the government's credit, I struggle to see what there is in the Hope Amendment that actually undermines the operationality of the bill, rather than perhaps helping it. Because if facts did change, wouldn't it be helpful to have a mechanism of that kind for us to be able to review it upon an informed basis?
Well, I too am also grateful to my honourable learned friend, and I'm grateful to him for his engagement both in this chamber during previous debates and also with me outside of this chamber. I hope to persuade him over the course of the next few minutes on this specific amendment as to why, in fact, it is unnecessary. And I share his respect for the noble lord, as of course we all should. But I respectfully disagree with him that this amendment is necessary. And let me explain why. Because the implementation of these provisions will be kept under review by that independent monitoring committee that we have been discussing. That role was enhanced by the treaty, enhanced from that originally as envisaged. And the commitment from our friends and allies in Rwanda is evident given the progress that has already been made. And let me set out 2 or 3 concrete pieces of evidence to help my honourable and learned friend. On Thursday, the 21st of March, the Rwandan Senate passed their legislation ratifying the treaty. Secondly, the domestic legislation to implement the new asylum system has been approved by the Cabinet and is now with Parliament for consideration, and a complaints process has also been set up. This, plus the wider assurances around the training process, which will ensure the quality of decision-making and building capability within Rwanda's asylum system, all reaffirm and point to the fact that we have confidence in Rwanda's commitment to delivering this partnership and their status as a safe country. As is evident, Madam Deputy Speaker, from our numerous debates, Rwanda has a strong track record of welcoming asylum seekers and looking after refugees. And it's also been internationally recognised as generally safe and stable. May I just turn to a further piece of evidence, and that's in the world rankings. Because Rwanda's overall score in the World Justice Project's Rule of Law score has increased consistently. It's first in sub-Saharan Africa and it's 41st globally. In fact, it's higher than both Georgia and India that this Parliament has, over the very recent past, confirmed are safe countries as well. Those who are relocated to Rwanda will be given safety and extensive support as detailed and set out in the treaty. And I'm grateful to all the officials in Rwanda who have been working so hard on this. May I turn next to the Amendment 6D? And this is one that I do characterise as a wrecking amendment. It would simply encourage illegal migrants to continue to frustrate the system through lengthy legal challenges in order to prevent their removal. And it runs contrary to the core purpose of this bill. This bill strikes the appropriate balance of limiting unnecessary challenges that frustrate removal whilst maintaining the principle of access to the courts. And taken as a whole, the limited availability of domestic remedies maintains the right constitutional balance, the balance that we've all been seeking in this chamber between Parliament being able to legislate as it sees necessary and the power of the courts in order to hold the government to account. May I turn to the final amendment, Amendment 10D? Can I acknowledge, as I acknowledged during our last exchange, that this government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who have shown courage by serving alongside us. I repeat, we will not let them down. Section 4 of the Illegal Migration Act enables a Secretary of State to specify categories of persons to whom the duty of remove will not apply. And once the United Kingdom's Special Forces ARAP review, which was announced on the 19th of February, once that has concluded, the government will consider how to revisit our immigration legislation and how to ensure that and how it will apply to those who will be eligible as a result of the review. Yes, of course I'll give way.
It's one thing to hear the Minister give the assurances he's given today, but the fact remains that we have been out of Afghanistan now for some time. There is considerable evidence that those who helped us and put themselves in danger as a result have not been able to get easy access to the United Kingdom and get immigration status. And therefore, why, if in the past, when the difficulty is quite clear that these people are facing, why, if the government has not dealt with it then, should we take assurances it will deal with them in the future? And this amendment is therefore necessary.
The answer is this, because this Prime Minister has placed around his cabinet table, sitting at the cabinet, my right honourable friend, the member for Plymouth Moorview, a veterans minister sitting at the highest level. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is somebody who has served our country, as there are many honourable and right honourable members across on both sides of this House. We will not let them down. That is the reassurance that has been given from this dispatch box and also in the other place by the noble Lord Sharp as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am an optimist as well. And I confess that, despite the optimism expressed by the honourable member for Aberavon on Monday, I too am an optimist. May I take this opportunity, perhaps in the optimistic hope that this might be my last opportunity during the passage of this bill, to thank all of the bill team in the Home Office for their extraordinary work. It's a team effort, but may I praise one who has gone above and beyond, whose voice I hope it recovers, and she knows who I'm talking about. But it's been a team effort. May I also thank the parliamentary clerks for their advice and assistance, not least in our Marathon Reasons Committee sessions. And may I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for always ensuring that I have been in order. But to conclude, we have made it abundantly clear that our priority is to stop the boats. We simply cannot stand by and allow people smugglers to control who enters our country and to see more lives being lost at sea. We have an obligation to the public and to those who are being exploited by criminal gangs to stop this vile trade and to protect our borders. Letting this bill pass now will send a clear signal that if you come to the United Kingdom illegally, you will not be able to stay. I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1D. Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to actually start by thanking the noble Lords in the other place for all the hard work they've done in trying to amend this bill, which we know is quite frankly a sham and a con. But I'd like to highlight the restraint that they've exercised, actually, because despite the deeply damaging nature of this legislation in terms of its impact on our constitutional conventions and our adherence as a country to the rule of law, none of the amendments that are before us today are seeking to wreck the bill or the unworkable, unaffordable and unlawful scheme that the bill is seeking to enact. Not one of them would prevent flights to Rwanda taking off. Not one of them would stop the government flogging this dead horse of a policy. Instead, they seek only to commit the government to the promises it has already made about who will be sent to Rwanda and to clarify the mechanisms that will underpin that process. Now, I note that ministers have claimed that there is tremendous and pressing urgency in all of this. But if that is the case, then why did the government forego the opportunity to use Monday the 25th and Tuesday the 26th of March for debates and divisions on this bill? Could it be because they needed extra time to scramble high and low for an airline that wanted to be associated with this unworkable, unaffordable and unlawful scheme? Or could it be because the Home Secretary is unable to decide who should be exempted from deportation to Rwanda? Indeed, it has been reported that the entire harebrained scheme has been given a red risk rating in the Home Office because of his dithering. Which brings me to the Permanent Secretary's comments at the Public Accounts Committee on Monday, namely that 40,000 asylum seekers are currently stuck in the truly Kafkaesque perma-backlog of inadmissible cases whose claims for asylum the government are refusing to process. 40,000 is an awful lot of flights required, Madam Deputy Speaker, given that the government hasn't actually managed to get one flight off the ground, and given what we know about the Rwandan government's capacity to process just a few hundred cases per year. So given that a maximum of around 1% of the asylum seekers who are in the perma backlog can be sent to Rwanda, what is the Minister's plan for the remaining 99% who are stuck in this indefinite limbo of his government's own making? Is the plan to keep them in taxpayer-funded hotels, maybe, of which hundreds are still in operation, according to what the other immigration minister said on Monday, despite the government's boasts? Or perhaps they'll have an amnesty, which the Conservative member for South Thanet warned about last year, and his colleague, the Honourable Member for East Shoreham and Worthing, warned about at that very committee. Well, we know what we would do, Madam Deputy Speaker. We would deliver our backlog clearance plan, surging the number of decision makers to process claims quickly, and set up our new returns and enforcement unit with 1,000 new staff to remove those who have no right to be here. It is quite frankly shocking that the number of foreign criminals being removed has dropped by a staggering 27% under the Conservatives, and also profoundly worrying that the number of failed asylum seekers being returned has plummeted by 44% in that time, with just 2% of small boat crossers removed since 2018. What a sorry state of affairs. Put our plan for a new returns unit together with our cross-border police unit to go after the criminal smuggler gangs operating in the Channel upstream, funded, of course, through redirecting the money that's being squandered on Rwanda. And that gets you a compelling and realistic plan, Madam Deputy Speaker. A plan that is based on hard graft, common sense and effective international cooperation, in stark contrast with the headline-chasing gimmicks, empty gestures and blank cheques that have come to define the way in which successive Conservative governments have broken our asylum system and lost control of our borders. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's refusal to engage constructively with the other place on this bill is deeply disappointing, given that their lordships have simply been fulfilling their constitutional duty to revise and improve the draft legislation that we convey to them. The noble Baroness Butler-Sloss received a tiny concession for her commendable attempts to stop the government sending victims of modern slavery to Rwanda. But let's be clear, that concession was barely worth the paper it was written on. And it is utterly shameful that ministers are still refusing to accept the amendment in the name of the noble Lord Brown. Madam Deputy Speaker, we owe a debt of honour and gratitude to the Afghans who so bravely fought alongside British troops. And the idea that we might send them to Rwanda is simply unconscionable. But the noble Lord Brown's amendment is not only driven by a moral imperative, it is also underpinned by our national interest and by military logic, for the simple and obvious reason that the ability of our armed forces to recruit local allies will be severely constrained if this bill passes unamended. Turning now to the other amendments that are before us today, it cannot be repeated often enough that adherence to the rule of law must remain at the heart of our constitutional conventions and as a cornerstone of our liberal democratic values. It is therefore profoundly concerning that ministers continue to refuse to recognise how important it is for Britain to abide by these principles and to have this commitment on the face of the bill. I will give it.
The member for Aberdeen, I just simply want to say to him, if I may, and to put it to him, that the rule of law includes the basis of sovereignty on which it is quite clear from one great jurist to another, right the way down through generations, that where an act of Parliament is clear and unambiguous in its wording, it is the duty of the courts, as my honourable friend the member for Mid Dorset said just now with regard to Lord Reid's judgment, paragraph 144, it's the duty of the court to give effect to those words. That is the rule of law, not this confection which the honourable gentleman is generally producing time and again. And if I may say so, he's flogging a dead horse, not just once, because he keeps on saying it. He's repeated himself now 3 times. I've never seen a dead horse flogged so badly as by the honourable gentleman.
Well, taking lectures about flogging dead horses in the context of a debate about Rwanda really is quite extraordinary. If you wanted a definition of a dead horse, that's what this policy is. But we have had many exchanges on this point, and I enjoy my exchanges with the honourable member on this point. As I repeatedly say to him, yes, Parliament is sovereign, but Parliament must act with due care and attention and caution with regard to the opinions that come from our most eminent court, the Supreme Court. And in this case, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Rwanda is not a safe country. So it is frankly a travesty that Parliament is seeking to undermine the rule of our judiciary in that way, and it raises deeply troubling questions about this issue of the rule of law. I will give way.
Where would the proposed returns unit send illegals to, and what if the countries concerned didn't want to receive them?
I'm pleased the honourable gentleman asked me that question, because we get this point from the benches opposite about returns, but what I find fascinating is that when you look at countries like India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are clearly safe countries in principle, 80% of the applications from those countries whose asylum claims fail are not being removed by this government. For instance, the Home Office rejected asylum applications from 1,750 Pakistanis in 2023, yet Home Office data shows that just 620 people were removed to Pakistan in 2023, of which a fraction, a clear proportion of that would have been asylum seekers. Some may well have been foreign national offenders. So the key point here is that there are many, many countries where it is more than possible to be returning people to those countries, and the government is simply failing to do so. We also had an extraordinary question from my colleague, the member for Newport East, in Home Office Orals on Monday, where she talked about someone in her constituent who is a foreign national offender, who's been convicted of a sexual offence, and has asked to be voluntarily returned to his country of origin, and the Home Office has not facilitated and not been allowing to make that happen. So there is something going seriously wrong in terms of returns. 44% plummeted number in terms of failed asylum seekers since 2010. And I think we should be focusing absolutely on those countries with low grant rates, because that is where you can clear some of this backlog and return people to their country of origin when they have no right to be here. I will give way.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. I find it very interesting, his suggestion that all we need to do is ask India for emergency travel documents and they will immediately issue them. Has he made any attempt to find out what the issues might be there?
The key point here is, as I've said, that under the last Labour government, returns were working. Now, a part of that, I would suspect, is based on proper adult grown-ups being in the room and having proper adult grown-up diplomatic conversations with the governments with which we mean to engage. And I think what we've seen over the last years with this government is a consistent commitment to burning diplomatic relationships with a whole range of countries. And when you burn those bridges, it makes it much more difficult to achieve what we need to achieve in terms of our own national interest. So what we are clear on is that we've seen the government promising from that dispatch box a whole range of things, and the Lord's amendments on these rule of law issues before us are simply seeking to put on the face of the bill what ministers have promised. Why else are they rejecting the amendment in the name of my noble friend, the Lord Coker, which simply asks the government to commit to promises that they have made? Likewise, why not support the Lord's amendment in the name of the noble Baroness Chakrabarti, which allows ministers, officials and courts to consider whether Rwanda is safe for individuals on a case-by-case basis if the government supports the principle of appeals as ministers claim that it does?
Would I be right in thinking that because the noble Lord Coker has brought this forward in one shape or another several times, and it is central to this debate, in the light of what I said a bit earlier in my intervention, is the Leader of the Opposition supporting that amendment, and if so, why?
Well, for the simple reason that we simply want to put on the face of the bill an articulation of what has already been said by ministers from the dispatch box, and we feel that it is extremely important to underline this country's commitment to the rule of law. And clearly, he mentions the Leader of the Opposition as an eminent lawyer himself. There are few that are more committed to the rule of law than he. And finally, if there is a parallel universe in which the Rwandan government is able to process asylum claims in a safe and competent manner, then surely it makes sense to verify that point and those measures that are set out in the Rwanda Treaty, and to verify that they have been fully implemented, and for the government's hand-picked monitoring committee to establish that this is the case. That is not an unreasonable request from the noble Lord Hope, and the government should therefore be supporting his amendment, precisely as the chair of the Justice Select Committee pointed out. He's no longer in his place, but as he pointed out earlier. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me end by saying that the British people are looking on at this government's attempts to continue flogging this dead horse, which seems to have become the metaphor of the day, of a bill with a growing sense of bemusement and anger. Because blowing £500,000 of taxpayers' money on sending 300 people to Rwanda is utterly mind-boggling. And it is equally staggering that £2 million will be spent per asylum seeker to send them to Rwanda. Madam Deputy Speaker, you could surely spend £2 million more effectively on sending the Prime Minister and his 4 predecessors on a one-way trip to outer space with Virgin Galactic. Or, Madam Deputy Speaker, perhaps the right thing to do would be for the government to drop this entire failing fiasco and instead to adopt Labour's detailed plan to repurpose the Rwanda money into smashing criminal smuggler gangs and ending the Tory small boats chaos. We know what this bill is really about. The former Immigration Minister admitted it in December. It's all about the Prime Minister getting, and I quote, a few symbolic flights off the ground before the general election. And this weekend, a civil servant confirmed to the Eyes Lizzie Dearden in the I newspaper that efforts are geared towards a single flight as proof of concept, I quote, calling it an election vanity scam. And that really does tell us everything we need to know. None of this is actually about dealing with the chaos that they have created. They've just focused on getting a couple of symbolic flights off the ground. It's letting the cat well and truly out of the bag. Everyone can see this Rwanda scheme for what it really is. Everyone can see this legislation for what it really is. And everybody can see this government for what it is. I think we need a new one, and so too do the British people. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, bearing in mind the very short time, I will do my very best to speak briefly. We have 4 messages from the Lords, 4 amendments. I can deal with them in short order. Amendment 1, I think, has no merit. I have not voted in that particular issue before, but today I will vote against it because I think you cannot perfect that mess of a clause 1. I won't repeat the arguments that I've put on that, and I really don't think that this amendment improves with increasing additions of various statutes, as my right honourable learned friend said, so I think we should reject that. I agree also that Amendment 6, I think, is frankly a wrecking amendment. We know that the delineation of Clause 4 was specifically to deal with individual cases. It was a proper and right addition to this bill from the outset, which I think makes it compliant with the rule of law, and therefore that should be rejected. I won't repeat my arguments on Amendment 10. I do think that there's still a class of people who've served this country, who've been brave and who have exposed themselves to danger, who have not yet been dealt with. Many of them are in Pakistan, and I think that it would have been helpful to perhaps see an amendment in lieu to deal with that point, as my right honourable friend did with regard to modern-day slavery, for which I thank him. Can I say that I was pleased to hear about the detailed reference he made to the progress being made by the government of Rwanda to implement the provisions under the treaty. That is clearly the issue at the heart when it comes to Amendment 3 and Clause 2. He knows my concern about deeming provisions and the desirability of them meeting the reality of the situation, which is why I welcome his statement and the statement of the Noble Lord, the Advocate General in the other place, to say that this bill will not come into force until the treaty has been implemented. But I say this to him. I think he's conceded this properly. The amendment in the name of the Noble Lord, Lord Hope, is not a wrecking amendment. It's designed to make sure that there is a mechanism through which this place can either deal with the fact that Rwanda is a safe country, or, God forbid, if it ever deteriorated to a situation where it wasn't, that we wouldn't need primary legislation to correct this situation. Because at the moment, we would. And that is why I think having a provision in the second subclause of Amendment 3 to allow this place to be involved in a situation where Rwanda might no longer be a third country, a safe country, on the advice of the Independent Monitoring Committee, which of course is a creature of the treaty itself, set up under the treaty, as he has described. It's not part of the Hope Amendment to set up a new body. That's not its intention. I will give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable learned friend for giving way. He knows I share his reservations about the inability of this House to reconsider the matter of the safety of Rwanda under the current legislation. But isn't the problem with the Noble Lord Hope's amendment that the mechanism he describes gives to the monitoring committee the final say on the safety of Rwanda, because it doesn't give this House the opportunity to say, we've heard the advice of the monitoring committee, but we nonetheless believe that Rwanda remains a safe country for the purposes of this legislation. Now, he and I might think that that's a wholly unlikely scenario, but as a matter of parliamentary sovereignty, it must surely remain possible, should it not?
Up to a point, Lord Copper, I think on subclause 2, there will be leeway for the government to actually disagree with the advisory committee, which might advise that Rwanda is no longer a safe country, but in the opinion of the Secretary of State, it is. And then it would be a matter for Parliament to determine, and the trigger wouldn't come into place. On the first subclause 7, I think he's on stronger ground in the sense that the words of the Lord's Amendment does relate to a statement from the Independent Monitoring Committee. But I'll say this to him. I have no problem with an independent monitoring committee that has been set up by a treaty that has been agreed to by this government and by the government of Rwanda, which has come into force in our law through the constitutional, the CRAG provisions. And I think that, slightly inelegant though it is difficult to see perhaps another way to do this that could be conclusive and which could, I think, give certainty to all those who are involved in the operation of this scheme. My right honourable friend, an old friend at the dispatch box, knows that what I want to seek to do is to remove and reduce the possibility of legal challenge. I do not want to see this legislation becoming the subject of angst, sturm und drang in either the High Court, the Court of Appeal, or, God forbid, the Supreme Court. We've been there, and we've seen the effects of what happened when the situation as of 2022 was determined on the evidence by the Supreme Court. He knows my views about that. However, whatever concerns I have about the Supreme Court, in effect, conducting a test on evidence, which I don't think is, frankly, what it should be doing, it is the Supreme Court to deal with the law of this country and to interpret the law of this country. That is the reality in which we operate. And I want to make sure that this bill doesn't end up in that same problem, which is why I think the Noble Lord Hope's amendment has strong merit. It clears up any doubt that there isn't a mechanism either for the executive or this place to either apply the provisions of the bill or to disapply them when the facts change. Let's make sure, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the reality keeps pace with the law and that deeming provisions, however attractive they might be, aren't used as a device to cut corners or to run ahead of ourselves in a way that will only, I think, cause problems, not just for the judicial system, but for the operation of this policy itself, which he knows I have consistently supported and will continue to support as an innovative and proper response to the unprecedented challenge of mass migration that the West is facing now. This is serious stuff. I want the government to get it right.
SNP spokesman Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'll start in order here with Lord's Amendment 1D in the name of Lord Coker. And the Minister asked why these particular pieces of legislation are things that the government ought to have due regard for. Why would we want to have due regard for international law and various acts, including the Children's Act, the Human Rights Act and the Modern Slavery Act? Well, I think the reason why we want to have due regard for these things is found in the front piece of this bill, which says, in the name of the Home Secretary, I am unable to make a statement that, in my view, the provisions of the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill are compatible with convention rights, but the government nevertheless wishes the House to proceed with the bill. The government is setting out to undermine our international obligations, so it is quite right for the Lords to insist that we should abide by our international obligations. That's the very least this government should be doing. And there are implications for children, for people who have been victims of slavery and trafficking, of people whose human rights are going to be abused. And the government should be paying far more due attention to this than it intends to do. Moving to Lord's Amendment 3E in the name of Lord Hope. I think there is significance in making sure that the Monitoring Committee can do its job and do its job properly, because it's not clear. It's not clear at all the circumstances in which Rwanda can be declared not safe. The Monitoring Committee is supposed to produce an annual report once a year, which then goes up the chain to the next committee, joint committee. But there is no mechanism within that for them to blow the whistle should something happen. There is no mechanism for them to say suddenly something has happened here and Rwanda is no longer safe. What happens in that circumstance? What happens to those recommendations? How does that become activated? And what then happens to those people that are in transit that the UK hopes to send to Rwanda? There is no mechanism within